All right, we're going to get underway, everybody. So good afternoon. Welcome to the July 12th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to recognize, first of all, that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry, always a pleasure. And today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192, governing open meetings. As the province moves into Phase 3 of the reopening plan, a number of items to note. Question period has been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to the podium to address council. And our first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. So I turn to Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. For late items today, we're adding a report British Columbia Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant to item 6D1. And for Reimagine Nanaimo, we're replacing the attached PowerPoint with a new PowerPoint presentation. There has been some changes. As well, Mr. Chair, we were going to switch the agenda items to allow the delegation, the item with the delegation, item 6.2, to go ahead of 6A1. However, I don't see the delegation here, so I think maybe we'll keep the order as listed, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you. I think it was a good thought to accommodate the delegation, but as you say, I don't see them in attendance, so we'll stick with our agenda as originally printed. Thank you, Ms. Gurry. So I'd ask for a motion for adoption of the agenda as amended. Mayor Krogh, and seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And I'd ask for a motion for adoption of the minutes as circulated from our meeting of June 28th at 1 o'clock. No. Yes. Governance and Priorities Committee. We're in July now, aren't we? The weeks are sliding by. Move those minutes. Councillor Hemmons, thank you, and seconded Mayor Krogh. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So we move to agenda planning, and Ms. Gurry, again, it's over to you for this item.
Thank you, Chair. So starting on page 4 of your agenda page 11 of your agenda lists the GPC matrix, Governance and Priorities Committee matrix, where you had previously ranked items in priority order 1 through 11. There were a couple items that were a tie. You had ranked them a few months ago, and now is basically the set time, a few times a year, where you all get together and review those items to see if they are still a priority, if there are additional priorities that you would like to look at, as well as the status of the priorities that you currently had listed. So the matrix itself starts on page 15. So when reviewing the status of where we're at with these items, some things for you to keep in mind for new items and or where we're at with these items is do your priorities align with your strategic plan and the strategic alignment exercise that you went through with Mr. McIntosh a few months ago. So those are things to keep in mind, our budget planning process coming into the fall, as well as where you're at in your term. So those are just some things to keep in mind. On your list, you had neighborhood associations. This is in progress. You have had a couple sessions on neighborhood associations with a plan to meet with the group at the GPC in September, meeting with various neighborhood association chairs, etc. So that is in progress and ongoing. Crosswalk safety, you've had a number of sessions on those, I think 3. So we have that marked as in progress. I'm not sure if that will ever be complete, because as you go through your active transportation plan and Reimagine Nanaimo, you're constantly looking at crosswalk safety and a number of other active transportation initiatives. One Port Drive is set to be reviewed at this committee, and it is hasn't happened yet, but it is scheduled to be coming soon to you. The capital planning process you have completed. Safety and security is in progress. You have a session on that, and there is a strategic plan being developed for security and safety in Nanaimo. Waterfront walkway is scheduled to come before you. Election signage is scheduled to come before you in September, so staff will be bringing forward a report on that. The street entertainers bylaw, I don't believe that is in schedule yet, but we do have it slated for Q4. The Vancouver Island Conference Center should be coming to you, I would say, in the fall as well. It was slated for Q2 or Q3, but that has been pushed a little bit ahead because of staff capacity. Sports venues and tourism strategies is now complete. Mr. Harding brought that to you. Committee structure, I was planning to bring to you, I hope, in September. And Westwood Lake Amenities Overview wasn't part of the original ranking process, so that is just one item that has been added by a member of the committee since we originally did the rankings, and that could be part of your discussion today. Another thing to keep in mind with the Governance and Priorities Committee meetings, as during this time you are the steering committee for Reimagine, and there has been a lot of work involved and a lot of commitment that you all have been providing and giving to Reimagine as the steering committee, and that is taking up a lot of the time for your Governance and Priorities Committee meetings. So that is something as we move forward to discuss future topics that you might want to consider as well. So I would turn it over to you, Chair, to see if there's any committee members that wish to add items, or if there's questions about the status of the current items, or how you wish to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. And I just note that we do have another full schedule or full agenda this afternoon, so quite honestly, I'd prefer not to spend a lot of time on this item. I think we'll have more time in 2 weeks. But certainly, Council, we're open to comments or questions at this time, if councillors have any. And I see Councillor Armstrong. There we go.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that when we're doing the transportation update, that the Chase River and Extension will be on in the near future, as we have 2 more bad accidents, so that puts it up to 81 in 5 years, which is one of the highest for serious accidents. So I'd like to see what we're doing and move the plans ahead on that. But that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Gurry making a note. Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair Thorpe. It's not related to agenda items, or potential agenda items, but when we first discussed this, Mr. Cuff had recommended agendas committee, and I increasingly think that is necessary. I think there's lots that's making onto the GPC that doesn't need to be on a GPC, including, I think there's a couple today's items that could go directly to council. So when we discuss committees, I would very much like to discuss the format of GPC, because I still feel like we are adrift with the GPC and not hitting the mark on what it's supposed to be. Thanks.
Thank you. Did you wish to respond, Ms. Gurry? Or?
No, I have made note of that. If Councillor Brown could maybe give one of the examples of the items today, it might be helpful moving forward. I do know we often bring things here that we believe would require some discussion or thought from you before bringing it forward for a decision at a council meeting. But if there was something today, for an example, that might help us moving forward when we're planning these agendas.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks. I think it's bigger discussion than just this agenda, but I would make a strong case that 6A1, 6A3, and D1.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, Councillor Brown. Your microphone, oh, now it's on.
Okay.
Good.
I think it warrants a greater discussion about the GPC format and what it could be, but I would argue that 6A1, 6A3, D1 could all be direct to council, and I would also argue that we had an opportunity here with respect to community amenity contributions, where we could invite Mr. Moss and others to be active participants in the discussion to unpack this a little bit more. And he's a delegation. So I think we're just sort of missing the mark on some of the intention of the GPC, and I would welcome that conversation with council at a future date, not here. And I think it would probably make sense at the committee days to say, how are other people feeling about the GPC, and do we feel like it's being realized as discussed, or has it sort of just become a cow by another name and just with a slightly smaller agenda? Thanks.
Thank you. And just on this topic of committees, and maybe not directly related to your point, I think I suggested the topic of examining our committee structure and how well it's working, and if we might want to re-examine that. My subsequent thinking has been that at this stage of the term would probably be more appropriate to leave for the next council, but that might not necessarily jibe with what Councillor Brown is, the point he is making. I'll go to Councillor Bonner. You're next.
Thank you, Chair. Pretty well the same idea on GPC as Councillor Brown has just mentioned. I'm looking at July 26th, and I don't know where some of these came from. Like, I know it wasn't in our matrix, and even I agree that there are, like the grant application that we're looking at today, that could easily have gone straight to council. I mean, it is a council decision that's required, and there's nothing wrong with having a bit of conversation at a council meeting. The mid-year transportation update, I understand we get that, but are we going to be making any serious changes to our transportation policies or bylaws? And if we're not, why not just have it at a council meeting? And staff would give their update. We'd thank them very much, as we usually do, and then we'd carry on. So I would prefer that big ticket items such as today, the community amenity contributions, have the time that we need to devote to such a large topic. And coming up is sports tourism. And I understand that the work, as said, has been complete. Now would be the time to have a GPC on it, instead of when staff have completely put together an entire report with all the recommendations, and then they kind of own it at that time. So our input into this is limited. So I would rather see our conversations happen before these large reports come to us with all the information all laid out for us. Do you accept this, or do you want something different, sort of thing? Thank you.
Thank you. Good points. Councillor Brown, is this a holdover?
Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Armstrong.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to agree with the points made by Councillor Brown and Bonner. I just would say, though, on the transportation, I know that there's numerous delegations that want to come to speak to the issues out in that area, so I do think a GPC would be important for that particular one, just because that's where we're supposed to be getting all the community feedback, is at GPC. And that's the thing I've been finding missing at the GPCs, is very little community feedback. So I would like to see more of that, because to me, this has become just let's just update council on stuff, not stuff that I think is important to the community. So a lot of this stuff I would just prefer to read too, but anyhow, those are my points.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I'm just curious, through the chair, and maybe to Ms. Gurry, what is the impact of COVID had on us being able to have the GPC committee meetings with the engagement we were intending to? I think COVID may have impacted that. So just a question.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor Martman. Most definitely it's had an impact to some extent or another. Initially, when there was no public able to attend and Zoom was new to a lot of people, that was a barrier for certain. As the pandemic carried on, people became a lot more technologically savvy, and there was more of an opportunity, but council and citizens alike, I feel, didn't find that same sort of engagement opportunity or benefit to attending via Zoom. So that in-person attendance has obviously been lacking up until just recently.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Just to add to that, I've heard from many in the community that 1 o'clock is not a good time for community engagement because the majority of people are working. So that's an issue we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Chair, Just with regards to the GPC, I definitely welcome some further discussion on it. Yeah, sometimes I think, there's items on the agenda that may not need as much time as they're given, and eat into more discussion on other items that we need a deeper dive on. And I think figuring out how we can regulate that. I do like sometimes that, staff is bringing forward an item to just sort of put on our radar for a bit of discussion beforehand and bring council up to speed on. I think that there is use for that, but it's figuring out, if there's some screening beforehand by the chair and some discussion that can get the pulse of what's council's needing, and then for council to be able to regulate how much time we spend on it, so that we're not eating up the important discussion and community feedback that we're trying to elicit more of. So yeah, discuss more later on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing other names at this point. So Ms. Gurry, what I'm hearing is some type of discussion around our use of the GPC meeting and how we feel it's working and how we could look at improving it. And you also mentioned, and I think we need to keep this in mind, the amount of time that's needed for items related to Reimagine Nanaimo, and whether we need to have specific meetings just on those topics. I'm still not seeing any other names. Ms. Gurry?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For certain, if it's more meetings dedicated to just Reimagine or a separate meeting date for Reimagine, I think that's definitely something for you to consider as it moves forward. It is a really important project, or the most important project the city's undertaking right now. So, and as the steering committee, there is a time commitment. And as well to some of Councillor Gesselbrock's comments, when we do have this agenda planning listed on all of the GPC agendas and it shows what's upcoming, please, as a committee, feel free to give me that feedback for the future meetings. We usually give a month's worth of meetings, what we have planned, and that does change and is flexible. And you can definitely take the agenda planning opportunity at the start of these meetings to give that feedback for certain. I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Rudolph, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to make the point that Councillor Martman made about we're just now, this is our first GPC post mask requirements and all those requirements around COVID. So we've been in a different mode now for over a year. And it is timely now to recalibrate, I think, the functionality of this group, and also if there's any changes to the committee format. I would suggest maybe revisit this at the next meeting, and I'll have maybe as a second go at figuring this out. Ms. Gurry made the comment about staff try to anticipate those topics that you might need a little more information in order to make decisions, which is primarily the function. You may disagree with me, but the function of council is decision making. It's not necessarily debate. You can have your debate around the decision making, but a lot of this has been intended to give council the information that it needs to make those informed debates and conversations and decisions later on. So, so it is true. This is now, we've just been in a different mode, and then we're coming back into a more normal mode where it is possible to have delegations come and participate at the table. And I think this has been a recurring theme since council started about how to facilitate that dialogue at the table, or in a way that this community engagement piece, and it's not gone away. In fact, it's just been kind of parked for a while in a way. So, and I don't think that we're completely out of the hybrid or electronic digital version of that either, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it enables a lot more people to participate if they don't actually have to physically be here. So that's a whole dynamic, and maybe the theme around this could be a little bit more about, instead of the topics, the mode of how this committee is to function over the next 12 to 15 months. So it'll be obviously on the next GPC. We have one more before the break, and you'll have the chance to, maybe we can give some thought to how to structure that a little bit more. In the absence of that, we will bring forward things as they materialize, and if you would prefer, go directly to council with some of these items, and then if you feel there's more discussion, needs to refer back to GPC, that's easy to do as well. And that's not an uncommon method either. So there's just different ways to deal with it. And we struggle with these huge agendas, and one of the components of this is then the reimagine exercise, which I think is getting to a point where you may need to just have dedicated meetings for that alone. And we're just trying to be efficient with those GPCs on Mondays and putting things together for you. But certainly in the fall, as you get to phase 3, you're going to see a lot more time required, I think, to work through the policy documents and all that stuff that's going to come out of that exercise. So I fully expect you're going to have more meetings needed to be assigned to that topic, and you're going to want the time to spend on it. So we might have to carve that off separately. So it'll be on the agenda in 2 weeks, and you've given some good feedback today and some of the ideas that are on your mind about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrock, did you have something else? Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. When this item is done, Mr. Moss is here. He's in the lobby. So if council is willing to move that forward ahead of Ms. Robertson's policy update and project, he is here to speak to that topic.
Yes, I noticed that. Thank you very much. So I'll just ask if there's any other comments, first of all, on the agenda planning topic. And then seeing none, we'll move into reports, and I would ask for a motion to, no, Ms. Gurry?
If council is amenable, as the chair and myself, we can rearrange the items. So if council is amenable, you can just...
Unless there's no objections, we will switch around 6A1 and 6A2 and allow Mr. Moss to make his presentation and not have to sit through other reports and discussion when he might have other things that he needs to get on with today. So we'll move to 6A2, Community Amenity Contribution Policy, and it is going to be first of all introduced by Mr. Lindsay. And then we have a presentation, I believe, and then the delegation. So you can still sit for a few minutes, Mr. Moss. Mr. Lindsay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. And this is a topic, of course, that the committee's aware that we've been working on for a couple of years now in terms of a policy review, and this is the second time that we've been in front of you in the GPC format. As you mentioned, we have a presentation. Ms. Brinkman's been our project lead on this initiative, and she presented to you the first time we were here back in the spring, and I'm going to turn it over to her at this time to walk you through kind of where we've been in the past few months. So over to Ms. Brinkman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brinkman.
Thank you, Chair. So this presentation is to provide you with an overview of the process to date to establish a new community amenity contribution policy for the City of Nanaimo. As a reminder, community amenity contributions, or CACs, are offered by a developer at the time of a rezoning application or land use related covenant application. And it is beneficial for the city to have a community amenity contribution policy so that the development community has guidance and certainty of the city's expectations when considering a rezoning proposal. The city has been collecting CACs since 2010, and if you could move to the next, I can move to the next slide. Oh, no, this is Darren's presentation, sorry. It's just the slide with the table. So I just have one slide today, so that's the slide with the table. So I'll be referring to different columns on the table. So the city has been collecting CACs since 2010, and since that time the rates have been as shown in column 1, and I maybe won't try and point to it. So that's $1,000 per unit. And these rates are low in comparison to other similar communities, and council directed staff to review the current rates and create a new CAC policy. So in 2019, the city retained land economist Jerry Mulholland of Rollo & Associates to conduct a market analysis and to provide recommendations for new CAC rates for Nanaimo. In 2019, Mr. Mulholland recommended that the CAC rates for Nanaimo could be as shown in the last in the last column on the table, so starting with $8,000 per unit. And also to give the development community time to adjust, Jerry recommended a gradual increase to the rates commencing in January 2022, so that's the first pale blue column, with a gradual increase in 2023 and 2024 to the final column there. So thus, Jerry advised that although the development community could absorb these rates, it is recommended to introduce the rates gradually. During the fall of 2020, staff held several meetings with representatives of the Nanaimo development community, and the CAC rates, as you see in the March 8th column, so 22,500 per unit column of the table, were a result of that consultation, and were generally deemed to be acceptable by those who participated in the 2020 consultation process with staff. Thus, the version of the policy presented to the Governance and Priorities Committee on March 8th contained the rates you see in that March 8th column. Note that these rates are similar to the first step in Jerry's recommended gradual increase, which is beside it. At the March 8th GPC meeting, the committee chose the alternative option, which was to support the CAC rates as recommended by land economist Jerry Mulholland, and the committee provided direction for staff to engage in broader community consultation. After the March 8th GPC, staff updated the CAC policy with Mr. Mulholland's recommended rates, and then in April of this year, the policy was sent to active neighborhood associations and to representatives of the Nanaimo development community for review. And the comments received from that process are included in the agenda today and attached to the staff report, attachments B to F. In response to what was heard during the consultation, staff integrated changes to the policy. So in response to a neighborhood association comment, the policy was amended such that when a rezoning application is all ready for an affordable housing project, the CAC monetary funds that are collected for that rezoning application would be directed to an amenity in the community, not necessarily go to the Housing Legacy Reserve Fund. Also, in response to the Nanaimo Development Group's comments, the special considerations section of the policy was revised in two ways. It no longer contains a vacancy rate, such that the 50% CAC reduction can be applied to secured market rental dwelling units, regardless of a vacancy rate. And we talked a little bit about that at the March 8th GPC meeting. And also, private developers can now receive a CAC waiver for secured non-market rental dwelling units when the units are operated by a nonprofit housing partner or public institution. So that's an overview and summarizes the policy development to date. And the CAC policy is being presented today to seek the committee's guidance on next steps.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brinkman. Before we move to the delegation, does any member of council have questions of staff at this point? Not seeing your, oh, there it is. Go ahead, Councillor Markman.
I do, but I'm thinking perhaps I should hear from the delegation first.
Certainly, we can always ask questions of staff after the delegation has been received.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not seeing questions of staff at this point, so that means we will invite Mr. Moss to come to the microphone, representing Tectonica Management. Mr. Moss, welcome. Good to see you. And if you're ready to go, you have 5 minutes.
Perfect. Is the clicker available? Or so apologies for the start. I was a little confused about signage and locked door in the lobby, but I'm here now. So, and today I'm here on behalf of the Nanaimo Development Group, not Tectonica.
Thank you.
It's a representative of 40 or so local consultants and developers aimed at helping provide constructive feedback on policy changes. So,
Mr. Moss, if I could just get you to maybe move the microphone up a little bit closer. Thank you.
Better?
That's much
better.
Hey,
I can hear myself.
There we go.
Okay. This will be a very brief presentation. I know there's been lots of time spent on this, and I don't want to occupy more time than is useful. So the Nanaimo Development Group is actively in agreement that the CAC policy is ready for an update, that it can be adjusted and increased to see rates that are more in line with neighboring communities and the market. We also very much enjoyed the active participation with staff early on this year. We went through 2 or 3 good sessions where we talked through challenges and worked through collaborative solutions. Those were in the March 8th presentation. And unfortunately, since that point to this point, there's been a number of those compromised solutions that have been not carried forward, and so we'd like to see some of those come back. CACs, as I think everybody here has painfully had to become aware of, they're a very complex issue because they encompass a large number of project types and try to capture a segment which doesn't really exist until someone asks for it. So it's a very complex little issue, but we think it's important to share a couple of general thoughts. CACs, as we see them, are a tool to indicate to the development community what we're looking for a little bit. If we have a CAC policy that is aligned with, that supports the mandates of council and where we want the city to go, we think that's a better position for the policy, rather than having portions of our policy speak to things that may not align with the overall goals of our council. CACs remain but one piece of our picture. Any development has to go and touch on multiple policies and multiple constraints, and CACs are just one piece of that. And each one of those has an impact on cost of to the developer and to the end client. I think Rollo and I have a different viewpoint on that, but we don't need to get into that right now. CACs are also, while a very nice short-term fund that allows for increase in land value afforded by the council to be shared back to the community, it's important to remember their scale in the overall win of a denser, more complete city. The property tax comparison alone is significant, and the amount of revenue that's generated for a city, not to mention the vibrancy and lightening load on utilities and all the rest of it. So just in the high level context, we want to remember that our opinion is that creative, well done rezonings take us to where we want to be, and that process does give lots of input along the way for council and staff to adjust the process to make sure it is in alignment with those overall objectives. So we just want to make sure a CAC policy really does reinforce where we want to be going. I don't want to get into a lot of detail. There's only a few points left, I think, that we'd like to talk about, and it goes back to the March 8th discussion paper or discussion policy that came out. We were very close in alignment across the community on that policy. There were a few points that I think still were left to be discussed, and those focused, and they continue to focus on, first of all, how we calculate the CACs, whether it's by door or square footage or square meters. And I think it's important to note that there's room to make those align with the different building types. There's some building types that really do scream per door, and there's some that scream floor area. And so further thought on that would be useful. The net versus gross discussion is integrally tied to the amount of the CAC fund. I see CACs and NDG sees CACs as an ability for a community to take a portion of the allotted increase in land value and use that to better the community. And we feel the net formula, so the absolute increase in floor area or number of units allowed, is the better measure to stay consistent with that. When we talk about the gross, we believe that it actually deters creative small to medium densification. On a large project from 1 to 15 or 1 to 20, it's not important, but if you take a 50 to 55, it starts to rival the land cost. So important to think that through. We will always advocate for more affordable housing. Thank you to staff for adjusting that, but we'd love to see it go further to allow private developers to play a creative role in that, whether that's through CAC or Schedule D. And once CAC rates when the format's decided, CAC rates can then be nailed down. We strongly support option 2 and would love to see the March 8th version of the report go back to be adjusted to compensate for staff's comments on rates once we've resolved the issue around net and gross and the floor area portion. So for 5 minutes, that's what I can do, but I have all the time you guys want to answer questions, and happy to do so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Moss, and I appreciate your timing on that. So, Council, as I indicated, there is an opportunity still to ask questions of staff, but at this point, if there are questions specifically for Mr. Moss and his presentation, I would like to entertain those, and then we'll let him sit down again. So any questions of Mr. Moss? I see Councillor Turley first.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Mr. Moss. I'd like the opinion from your group with regard to the heavy loading at the last 2 years, where there's significant increases seen to, particularly for the single residential dwelling. We're going from a $2,500 increase from 2022 to 2023, and then a further $2,500 to 2024, and that is considerably more than the previous year's increases. Is that anything to do with future planning, or in other words, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and so I think I'd approach that of, if I was to do a development and think about a rezoning where I'm going to add 5 units, so I'm going to increase the density by 10% or something along those lines, it's going to be a mathematical discussion. And so depending on whether we're talking net or gross, I'm going to apply that value to my pro forma, and it's going to be added to the land cost of those units, and it's going to be measured against what I can either sell them for or rent them for, and there needs to be a differential there, otherwise I won't choose to do it, my lending partner won't let me do it. There's a pretty hard line there when we try to convince our lending partners to fund a project, and you need to be able to show that gap between income and expenses, otherwise they don't play. So while I believe there's room for us to increase the amount of the CACs and allocate more of that lift to the community, I think we need to be very careful about how we do it. But on the amount, it's tough to answer until we answer the net gross conversation, because it's very different.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Moss. I'm in agreeing with your recommendations, and I have a couple of questions. You touched on it again with Councillor Turley's comments. It's the net versus gross increase, and I always looked at the community amenity contributions, once I understood them, as sort of a way of doing profit sharing, in a roundabout way. Is we make decisions here that increase the value of land, or increase the ability to put value on that land. And so when we're done, at the end of the day, somebody, who's subdividing the property is now $250,000 richer on paper. And we only get $1,000 out of it. So, but after going through this whole process, it's a lot more complicated than that, and I recognize that. And I'm quite of the opinion that we should be looking at net as opposed to gross, because I don't know how many times things come to us where there's doing a rezoning to put an extra floor in, and usually that's done through density bonusing. But the very fact that you raised it, and to me, I read it and I said, well, that makes sense. And I said, well, why would we penalize someone and literally shoot ourselves in the foot by not getting the density that we've all wanted? And I don't think there's very few times someone's come before the council that we have not agreed with the density, right? So why put an encumbrance into that? And your example is a perfect example of doing that. So I would seriously want to look at going with net as opposed to gross. I think it makes sense. And the other part is the last piece on your letter is where you talk about the ability to do affordable housing. And I think we're missing the mark when we use the 4 criteria that in order to either get a break on CACs or get some sort of break, you have to have a not-for-profit running it. And I honestly think that we could just ask a developer who's building an apartment building or a townhouse or something like that to take one of those or 2 or 3 of those and put them into this system. And where they wouldn't be charged GSA, it would be 100%, but it would be a building or a unit that would be offered at a reduced rate according to everything. So by having those 4 criteria, we kind of kill all that, and I don't think we should. I think we should leave open as much opportunity for developers to become innovative and do that, because I have said this in the past, this is all about profit, but I do recognize that developers out there are living in this community as well, and they recognize the problems that we're having here. So I want to thank you for your letter. I'm quite in agreement with it. I think we need to do some more work on that. And could you talk a little bit about the last part I talked about in terms of what opportunities for affordable housing developers could do?
Yeah, and I go back to my comment that CACs is about one of many, and we have many chances to encourage and incent that kind of development, whether it's through our planning documents, our Schedule D, or other pieces. This one, in my mind, I don't think you're going to find a developer that's going to say, I can avoid 50% of my CACs, therefore I'm going to do affordable housing. But we want to make sure that this document aligns with the possibility of creating it so it doesn't become a block for that. Your Schedule D rewrite and those kind of things are going to give you a lot more opportunities to incent that and to push developers to see that advantage. But just make sure that hopefully we can keep this document to be aligned with where we want to be going on that.
Thank you.
I agree, though, that the necessity for a nonprofit operator is difficult. Maybe it's not-for-profit or other acceptable solution or something along those lines, because it's also difficult for staff to police that with a private developer. And so you need to make sure there's an ability to see that through as well.
And I could see that being done by the building manager. They would just give a report to staff or something like that once a year. Here's how much, usually was not necessarily was living here, but here's how much was. That's quick.
Councillor Bonner, could you just make sure your mic is on when you're talking?
Sorry, I was just going to say, that's my fault. I had taken Councillor Bonner off the speakers list too quickly. I should have known better. But having said that, I'm going to move on with his permission to Councillor Armstrong and then Martman and Geselbrock. Councillor
Thank
Armstrong.
you. A couple points for me. I agree with most of what your stuff, although I don't agree with the per door versus floor area for the simple reason, for me, I want to see more 2 and 3 bedrooms. We don't have any in the city hardly, and that's an area that is really missing. So for me, that's an incentive to get people hopefully to build bigger. So that's one of the issues I have. The second thing is I've been doing a lot of research on this with reading a lot of Patrick Condon. And I think one of the things that I really like that he's coming up with is what they're doing in Cambridge now, where they're doing the affordable zoning area bylaw, where if you're going to do affordable zoning, 100% have to be within the median market rate, and you can double your density that way. Do you think that would be something that we should be looking at here? Because the more we're building, the prices still keep going up. All the studies have shown that. You can't argue that. You just got Vancouver added over 40,000 new places, yet the rents still keep skyrocketing up. So I think if we start looking more around like what's happening in Cambridge, and I think Portland's looking at it too, do you think those would be options we could look at here?
I'm not familiar with Cambridge's zoning or affordable zoning bylaw, but I think that affordable housing into the future is going to take a total quantum shift in how we see housing. Developers aren't making a ton more money now than they were 10 years ago. The cost of building are just increasing, and when the cost of building of all product goes up, the market will increase the rental and sales price until it can't absorb it anymore, and then there'll be a correction. So, but you can at any point stop that trajectory by thinking about alternative housing, what housing means, what the priorities are for the demographic that are looking for housing, and starting to play with those planning bylaws to allow for a different type of housing, whether it be smaller housing, less parking, or units with 2 bedrooms with their own bathrooms so you can co-locate and cohabitate. There's different ways you can do that if we're being creative about the definition of what the demographic is looking for. And not seeing having the benefit of that bylaw, I can't comment on how applicable it is, but I do believe we need to rethink the housing form for who we're trying to help.
Thank you, and thank you very much for taking the time to reply back. Really great points.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I actually have a question for staff, but I will take the time to thank the delegation, and the information that you provided has prompted me to think of questions I want to ask staff. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Geselbrock.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to staff and to Mr. Moss, I guess first, like the reading through the net versus gross discussion, it makes sense. Like, we're changing the zoning, and there's going to be an increase to that beyond what was allowed before, and so it makes sense to calculate it on the net. Reading that, I'm curious, the question to staff, and maybe it can be a bit of a discussion, is like, what's the reasoning for not having it calculated on net?
So If I may, and I'm overhearing Councillor Martman say that she had a similar question, could we wait until we get to our staff questions? Just, I want to deal with Mr. Moss and then let him sit down, and then we can ask away to staff. So is that all right, Councillor Geselbrock?
Yeah, if we want to play it that way, it's we can do it that week. I can ask later for sure. I mean, it might be worthwhile.
I can share my thoughts on it. I think it's always, we're not talking about R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, R6, R7, R8, R9, all the way through, and each one has its own character. And to try to create a policy that's resilient enough to capture all those in one is challenging. And I think staff has worked hard to do that. And so there needs to be an alignment. There's certain zones that automatically align with a per door, and there's certain zones that would align more with a square meter. So my thoughts are that you probably need to be respectful of the different zonings and how you approach that. Otherwise, we're going to create a mess we don't really want. A single-family house is different than a 100-unit apartment building and need to be approached a little bit differently.
Great, thanks. And I guess to follow up, just a question. Also, the argument around switching to square footage, like ultimately, the calculation of the CAC comes down to what's fair with the lift that's created. You know, what can the market bear? What's fair, the percentage that the community gets? What's fair for the developer that's taking on the risk and to be able to make a profit? And I think that is a calculation that needs to be calculated, you know, by the market, and, you know, get city's perspective, development perspective, and a third-party perspective that can look at other jurisdictions. So on that exact number, it'll be what it'll be. But when getting into the granularity of, okay, are we going to calculate it based on unit or based on square footage, it starts to play a bit of a role as an incentive tool to either incentivize like density, greater density in that with smaller units, or if it's by unit, and that was sort of the argument that was given, sort of why we kept it by unit with the multifamily, that it would incentivize having larger units, basically, two 3-bedroom units. And I guess, yeah, I was just curious your perspective on that, because I think that touches on what Councillor Armstrong was saying, is like, you know, maybe it's not in the community's best interest to have, like, we want to incentivize multifamily buildings because that's the density increase that we're looking for. We want less smaller, but in the density within the multifamily buildings, we maybe not want a ton of micro units and be putting an incentive in place to like have a lot of small, tiny little apartments that might not be very livable. And there's a lot of housing advocacy against the sort of trajectory of increasing smaller actual living spaces. And so my question is, in terms of if we kept it by unit, would that have a pressure of incentivizing these 2-3-bedroom units, or is this just the wrong policy tool to even get into doing that?
Yeah, I think I would suggest that we're trying to align this to stay out of the way of the others a bit more. You're not going to have someone who sees the CAC policy and says, well, now I'm going to build all micro units. But if you were building a project where you were trying to decrease the square footage and you could get 3 more doors out of it, or by having a small increase in the allowable floor area ratio, which is how most multifamily sites and zonings are calculated, the policy wouldn't be supportive of that. It would be because it's by door. And so the square meter or square foot rate in a multifamily setting or in a commercial setting or industrial setting just aligns really well with how we measure density and how we measure value, how we buy property, the whole industry works around that. When you transition to a single family dwelling, it works the opposite. It's per door. And so I'm not sure this document is going to convince people to build one or the other. But if we keep it consistent with how the market sees these buildings and doesn't impede where it could be going, I think that's what we're really trying to say. So square footage rate is consistent with how we measure density, how we measure sale price, how we measure rent rates on multifamily buildings. Per door in single family is how we do all those same things. So, and with respect to will it incent smaller buildings like the micro unit kind of thing, I believe the macro level economy will drive that more than the CAC policy will. If I need to hit a $900 a month rent rate, I'm not doing that with a 2-bedroom. I just physically can't, right? That's not supportable in any way right now. So if I'm trying to find housing options for someone who's making $18 an hour and can afford 30 or 40% of their salary in rent, it's not a 2-3 bedroom unless they're sharing it. And then you have 2 or 3 bedrooms with 3 people living in it. Now maybe you can get to that required rental price. And so I see the CAC documents as really trying to align ourselves with the marketplace and how it works. And then Schedule D and other planning tools can really start to talk about, do we need a unit mix that supports families? We need those, absolutely. Do we need to change how we think about dwelling units to achieve that? Possibly. There's lots of other tools in staff and council's arsenal to achieve those. And we don't necessarily need to complicate this to get there, because it's not going to be strong enough to push one person away from one to the other. Because even if it was $8,000 a door, which is 50 to 30 to 50% of the land cost, it's just going to say, I'm not going to build the extra doors. I'm not going to change my building type to get there. I'm just not going to build the extra doors.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I just wanted to confirm that I heard you right, that you say that the CAC policy really will not have any bearing on whether somebody will build a 2 or 3 bedroom? There's other ways of doing it instead of using the CAC?
Yeah, I believe the CAC policy is more about whether people are going to build those extra doors. So say they had a development that was a mixture of bedroom types, but they had enough buildable area and in the zoning bylaw to get to that extra 2-3 units, but they need to rezone to get that because the density increase has to be done that way. They won't do that. So while the formula I provided you guys in that letter talked about the small square footage, because it really exemplified the difference between net and the square foot allowance, market's going to dictate whether we build smaller or larger units as much as anything else, but the CAC policy will decide whether we build additional units in that building. That's
Thank
probably
you.
the way I see it anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. One other question, and it's sort of not related, but I'd like your opinion on it, is parking. Interesting conversation that happens here all the time. So what you're saying is the GACs may, well, staff has said, and a few other people said that the GACs, CACs have the possibility of limiting larger families, like more bedrooms. And we have an off-street parking bylaw that says if you have more bedrooms, you have to put in more parking spaces. Do those two combined make it difficult to build larger bedrooms in apartment buildings?
I'd love to answer this. I don't know how applicable it is to CACs, but if we don't reimagine parking, we don't build affordable housing. But the cost per unit to build the kind of parking we built for the last 50 years doesn't meet the demographic of who we're trying to help in a lot of ways, and it does add cost. It's a quantum shift like I talked about earlier, but we need to be respectful of who we're building for. Some buildings need to be parked 2 to 1. The market dictates that, we build that. Some parking, I think there's some buildings out there that don't need to be parked. And so the parking bylaw is a very complex document, again, trying to quantify what the city needs and learns. We need to be rethinking those things as we look to provide alternate to housing and try to break down those very real market barriers. As costs go up, we need to rethink it. But it's not really CAC, I don't think. The two add, but that's a very in the weeds, I think, perhaps conversation.
Okay. One other, if I may, before you hit the button there, sir.
You're pushing your luck.
The question came up is commercial and residential, and a lot of time there's a push, especially if we're trying to build walkable neighborhoods, where there's commercial on the floor and residential above it. This policy doesn't speak to that a lot, and it says, if it's commercial, it'll be at this rate, and it's residential, it'll be at this rate. Do you think there's some latitude in the policy, or could be some latitude in the policy for builders who decide, okay, I will put in commercial on the bottom, but originally I was just going to be putting in residential? Would that be an incentive possibly?
Probably I would answer the same as the reality of retail in Nanaimo on the ground floor right now is there's lots of space and not much pressure to occupy that space. So when you build a new building for commercial shell and you're trying to get the rent and lease rates you need to justify the current construction cost and you're competing against five-year-old product, it's a special tenant that chooses to choose the new building. And so again, the CAC is not going to convince, I don't believe that they're going to convince someone to build more commercial. It's just a challenging place. Until we get more people living downtown and the need for those tenancies goes up, it's really tough to justify to build those commercial spaces.
So I guess my other, if we went opposite that, is that if the developer decided to do commercial and residential, that they didn't have community amenity contributions, is that an option? I mean, as a developer, what would you think about that?
I guess if you put the quantum in it, most of our apartment buildings are in sort of the 50 to 75 range downtown. And if you were saying, let's take the net discussion for now, say we were $5,000 a door because it's easy math, even though I don't like the door side. If we're increasing it by 10, so I'm saving 25 grand, that's not enough to incent me to build something I can't occupy. So Cardia is a great example. It's a wonderful building. COVID notwithstanding, we have one tenant for those three spaces. It's just challenging, and I think that the CAC policy is a great tool, but it's not going to overshadow the market realities of a time. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moss, seeing no other questions for you, I want to thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for the information and your answers to the questions that Council provided. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for moving me up in the agenda. It's much appreciated.
No problem. And Council, I hope that you'll understand my reasoning in separating or trying to separate questions to the delegation and questions to staff. I think in terms of good governance, that is proper procedure, and I want to avoid any potential situation where we have staff answering a question and the delegation wanting to rebut and getting into a debate, which, believe it or not, I've seen happen in past. So, having said that, we have an opportunity to ask staff any follow-up questions. We do have recommendations or options for recommendations, and basically they come down to either endorsing the proposed policy today or sending it back, and those are basically the two options that we have. So are there questions for staff? And now I turn to Councillor Martman.
Thank you. And picking up on the same question that Councillor Gesselbrock was asking, through to staff, I'm wondering the rationale behind net versus gross, because the information that was provided, the example was very simple. If they're planning a 50-unit building and it's already zoned for that, there's no additional cost. But if they were looking to be rezoned for an additional 5 units at 5,000, it's actually based on the gross rather than the net additional 5, which really makes you wonder what's the incentive for increasing the density. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll start and other staff can jump in here. And I think I'm happy to have this discussion and for the question. Thank you. I think it's important, first of all, to take a step back and remember we're talking about a community amenity policy that only applies when we're rezoning lands. So there's been a lot of talk today about other tools and mechanisms that are available for council to incent affordable housing, to incent different size of units. Council's done a lot of work of that already under your zoning bylaw. The legislation itself has exemptions for smaller units from DCCs. Council does not have a choice on that. That's provincially mandated. So I'm just trying to emphasize that we're talking about a very small portion of lands in the city, and for the most part, people develop out under existing zoning. When it comes to examples like heights and building heights changing, as long as the density is not changing, Council, you're very familiar with many times where you've been asked to vary heights to allow for one extra story, subject to the density working. The question on the net versus gross. So there's really two different philosophies when it comes to community contributions. You can do a really detailed work and figure out exactly what the land lift is, and this is what many communities like Vancouver do, where they have a whole team of staff that simply look at the value of the land. They do a pro forma before and after, they figure out what the lift is, and they take their cut of it. Very detailed, very specific. We've always, in the NIMO, had a more general policy of just keeping it simple, not going down, because we've heard in the past that we don't want to go down that route and spend the extra time on that. So we've always had more of a fairly simple policy that we could apply at a very high level generally. And as a result, we've done the gross over the net. One of the biggest challenges, if you say on the surface it sounds simple, but one of the biggest challenges you have to do is remember many of your zones allow for a wide range of uses and a wide range of opportunities, and many of them allow for outright residential. The mixed use can also be an option. So when you immediately say, well, we're going to go on the net, somebody has to sit down and figure, well, what was the original project? We have existing zoning, but what is actually you were going to build originally? So there has to be some work done to determine whatever that baseline is. We don't do that work right now. We simply look at what the proposed project is, and we apply a rate generally based on the gross floor area. And our consultant, understanding the review, coming in to do the review, understood that. And because of that, his recommendations were reflective on the gross area. His comment to us was, if I was doing it on net, the numbers would have been higher. I would have had a different number if I was going in looking at it on a net. So through the chair, that's a little bit of background about why we do gross, why the recommendation in the spring was gross. And also, I would just take this opportunity to note that also in the spring, our recommendations, which are outlined here in the second column, did have a per square meter for residential, because that's what we heard from the development of the community at the time, was to move away from a per door amount. So that's what the policy recommended. So I'm sorry, Your Chair, through the chair, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it's a fairly more complex, I think, than appears on the surface.
Well, we appreciate it, Councillor
If
Martin.
I may, just humoring me, trying to, so I understand that it's only for rezoning. That's the only time we're doing the CACs. But, so when it's being rezoned, wouldn't we know the difference? You say there isn't many of these throughout our city anyways. So I'm having difficulty understanding why it's complex to do it net versus gross.
So Your Chair, so if we just think about the very simple end of the spectrum, I guess, would be single-family zoning, single-family lots. You know on the surface that the zoning allows per 500 square meter lots, but you have to look at the individual property and determine the characteristics of that property, the access, the environmental sensitive areas, the frontage, a number of factors that actually go into what can you actually get on that property. And the only way to do that is actually go through a subdivision process, have a PLA review, have an engineering review done, and determine, okay, if you went under existing zoning, you could get these lots. There's no way for us to do a simple calculation that we could rely on. There's a whole review process for that. So if somebody says, I want to come in and rezone to smaller lots, we don't know what the baseline is to start with to determine the difference. So that's why we've gone with the gross. The more complicated end of the spectrum would be you have zones, multifamily zones in your downtown that allow for multifamily, commercial, a whole variety of uses. The densities are often established. The number of units in there would really depend largely on and the mix of uses would depend on the proponent's proposal. There's a wide flexibility. So what are you basing the new development to compare it to what? Because there's a whole number of different things that could be picked in there. It goes back to this, do you want to keep the policy simple and high level and easy to apply, or do we want to move to something more rigid and formal that requires a greater level of review? If council wanted to go to the net, then I would suggest, if that's important, that it be referred back, because I do think that our consultant, we would re-engage them. I think they would come up with different rates if that was the starting point.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Hemmons next, followed by Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Mr. Lindsay and Councillor Martin. A number of my questions were just answered. I'm going to change tacks now and go to the feedback we had from a number of community associations. I have two questions. Do community associations know that rezoning is an opportunity to identify new amenities So often we say neighborhood plans have these listed amenities, but we don't know how long that community plan, how long ago it was developed, and there's new emerging priorities, et cetera. So when we ask the developer to go out and do that consultation, is it clear to the associations that that is their opportunity to identify new community amenities?
Through the chair, I think I'd be speaking generally, but I would say I think most active and ongoing neighborhood associations are aware of the process. Our referrals we send to them through rezoning are partly for that purpose, to get their feedback on contributions. And certainly those who have active associations often point to the lists that have been generated in their neighborhood plan. So you may find some association, I guess, that's not aware, but I would say overall, generally, I believe they are aware, yes.
Okay, thank you. And are we specific in our language with the referral, that for those neighborhood associations perhaps that aren't, it's on? When the referral goes to community associations, those associations who perhaps aren't as long-standing or know the process as well, is it languaged specifically in the referral that this is an opportunity to identify community amenity contributions that are important to them?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that question. So certainly through the referrals, we do indicate there is what the amenity contribution is proposed. We provide all the information the applicant has given us. We also engage with community associations from time to time, whether it's through training, and we did that recently with the South End Neighborhood Association to make that more clear. But we do invite their comment and make ourselves available to answer questions. So try to do our best to answer the questions on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thanks, Chair Thorpe. Following up on Councillor Martman's question and the answer provided by Mr. Lindsay, I just was curious. I understand. Thank you for the background. I understand the historic nature of keeping it more simple and not doing the more in-depth analysis. But what I'm wondering is, through this process, did we contemplate a change in the approach, and when was the decision made and to carry on with the same approach, and who made the decision, I guess, would be the other question.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, can you hear me? Not very well. Okay, I'll speak louder. So in Mr. Mulholland's report, he explains about how he did his analysis to come up with his recommended rates. And so he used examples in the city of Nanaimo, current kind of development examples, and sort of did his pro forma, his financial analysis of what the profit would be from those examples to determine what a developer could afford. So he took that number, and he could take that number and divide it by the net or divide it by the gross. Right? So really what Jerry's analysis was doing for the city of Nanaimo is telling us for each kind of development type what the developer could afford to contribute as an amenity or as the monetary contribution. So if I believe, and this is from his report, if we were to go back to him and say, please, we would now like you to do an analysis based on the net, he will take the work that he did previously and kind of come up with an average net so that the city is still getting the same amount of community amenity contribution. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that is my understanding from the work that Jerry did, or Mr. Mulholland did, how he would go about that.
I think I just need to clarify my question, if that's okay. My question is not so much the difference between gross and net, but right now we take a very broad and simplified approach for the calculation. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to switch to the model that is used in some other places that is based on development economics and real estate analysis, did we explore that? And if not, why not?
Okay, I can answer that as well too. Okay. So I think when we started out, when we retained Mr. Mulholland to do the work, we asked him, the idea was to stay as consistent as possible with the approach City of Nanaimo was doing. And so his recommendation in his report was that approach. It was later when we did the consultation with the Nanaimo Development Community that they suggested the net approach. So I guess, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I would just Mr. Chairman, through to Councillor Brown, I was just going to add that I think going back to the original motion that was made from council was a review of the community contribution policy. I mean, correctly or incorrectly, we interpreted that of looking largely at the rates that we apply. We did not proceed on looking at whether we should now change paths and have a different strategy for how we adopt community contributions. If we misunderstood that and missed the mark, I apologize. That would be on me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geselbrecht.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that discussion, you know, maybe that could be a point of consideration is, you know, is it to our benefit to have a bit more subtler of an analysis when we're calculating the CACs and, you know, what it would take to do the net calculation, and is that worthwhile for what we do receive as a community? You know, I don't know if it takes more staff time and takes more time in the development process, what the implications are, but yeah, having that discussion, would it be worth it to maybe take that tact if it gives us a better result in terms of not disincentivizing the development that we're kind of needing, and at the same time getting you know, the appropriate contribution to the community. Aside from that, if we were to stick with the same model that we're currently using, how things are set up, basically we have rates for the different building types, be it single family and then the multifamily areas. And I guess this is a question to Mr. Moss, but is the real issue that we have right now just around the multifamily rezonings? Like, aside from the rates that we changed after the initial presentation, council decided to go with what the consultant provided in terms of the rate and the increase for single. But with the multifamily, that sounds where there's the issue of the gross, net versus gross, and also calculation on square footage. Is that really the only area that we need to adjust currently? Or are there other issues structurally with that's being brought up?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that the debate of net versus gross is limited to just residential. I mean, I think it could also, you could have the same argument about a property that was zoned commercial use and you were adding, rezoning to add additional density for additional commercial use. I assume that same debate would surface. So I don't believe it's just limited to multifamily. What I would say is, if you go back to the March 8th recommendation that we brought forward, and my understanding at the time when we had support from the Nanaimo Development Group to support that option, because we had these discussions at that table, and it was probably not a policy that everyone agreed on, but generally had the support of NDG at that time, and we were basing that on gross, basing it on the existing practice.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Holm, I saw your hand up.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Maybe I can add just a point of clarity too. We have actually, with the existing policy that's in place, negotiated on a net basis when appropriate. There's always the opportunity, even with the policy as drafted, to look at an application individually, and you know, if it warrants, if it's appropriate, we can look at a net negotiation as well. So it's not like that's off the table. It just, there would be endorsed rates, and when appropriate, if appropriate, we can, with the developer, negotiate on a net basis. But it is quite complicated just to, as has been explained previously, just to look at strictly net. There's definitely some challenges around there, but going with this policy as proposed, and even with the existing policy, Rock City Road is an example of a rezoning recently where we actually negotiated on a net basis, recognizing the significant density that was already on the table with the property's existing zoning.
Okay, can I follow up on that? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing people, actually. My apologies, and I'll try to speak more into the mic. Like, I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around, at the end of the day, this comes down to just sort of what the market can bear in terms of what's fair for the community and the community amenity policy to receive from the profit and what would go to the developer. I think when we made the decision to go with the initial, to go with what the consultant had suggested, for me, it was that this is what, a third party has looked at the market and done the analysis of what would be fair and what the market could bear. And I know that for the development community, that may seem more than what's fair. Compounding on that, though, is that what could exacerbate it feeling even more unfair is that if the way that it's calculated disincentivizes certain types of development, especially in multifamily and that. So what I would like in terms of the solution would be to find like what the market could bear that's determined by a third party that's less biased. Because like on the developer side, if I was a developer, I'm going to argue for how can I maximize, make it worthwhile for me. From the city side, we're going to try to what's the best for the community, and we need to find somewhere in between. But I don't want the way that we're calculating it further distorting it. So if we need to switch to gross floor area for the multifamily calculations as opposed to units, I'd be amenable to do that. If we need to switch to net, I'd be amenable to do that. If it doesn't require hiring 3 more staff and extending the length of the development process longer, because there's a reason why we wanted to keep it simpler in the first place. And so for me, those are the kind of moving parts that I'm trying to like wrap my head around in the direction to go, but that's kind of where my understanding is at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Armstrong, followed by Councillor Bonner, and I appreciate the good questions and comments of staff, or of council rather, but I'm hoping that we can, at some soon, a quick point, start to move ahead. Councillor Armstrong.
I actually wanted to refer this back to staff for further information and more work between the development company and the consultant group and our staff group, because I'm hearing lots of dissension amongst the group, so I think more information is required on the gross versus net. Is any seconded?
So if, for the benefit of Ms. Gurry, I could just get clarification on the wording of the motion. Councillor Armstrong?
Just to refer back to staff for further consultation with all affected parties. There you go.
And Councillor Martman is seconding, did I hear? Thank you. So
to speak further
a
to
motion to refer has been moved and seconded, referring back to staff. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, we heard from the NDG, which is, 5 or 6 big groups in the city that are responsible for many of our builds. So I think when they have concerns, I think we need to get a little bit more information and have staff work with them a little bit more to see if we can get a better consensus. I'm hearing lots of issues that versus gross versus net, et cetera. So I think we need more information before we can make an informed decision.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner, did you wish to speak to the referral motion?
I will. Yeah. Thank you.
Please do.
I'm sort of, with all due respect, not going to vote in favor, because I think we have enough information here to have a really wholesome conversation so that staff knows what they're going to come back to us with. So at the point I was going to recommend going with option 2, but prior to that, I just wanted to have a little bit more conversation, and I understand time is of the utmost here. But to me, and so I'm speaking to the motion, I'm going to vote against it because I think we have enough information, but I don't think staff has heard from us enough on what we would like to see. So that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Brown to the referral, and then Mayor Krog.
Thanks, Chair Thorpe. I'm not necessarily opposed to sending it back to staff. I just think we need to be if we do send it back, crystal clear on what our intention is, so we can, next time we get back to this table, or if it comes back to this, assuming it's successful and comes back to this table, then the expectation of the information that we want is being fulfilled, and I'm not convinced we're at that point yet where staff would have some clear direction on. I think it'd be great to send back in some more dialogue between the Nanaimo Development Group and staff, but what are they dialoguing on to get back to us? That's what I'm not clear on. So at this point, I can't support this.
Thank you. Mayor Krug.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm inclined to agree with Councillors Bonner and Brown. What are we sending it back to staff for? At some point, we have to fish or cut bait. This has been 18 months, am I wrong? Gestation period of an elephant to get us to this point, and I think it's time we sort of made up our minds and settled down. We can always talk about a review in a year or two, but I'm not anxious to see this kicked down the road a little further because I'm not sure unless, and I'm anxious to hear from any members of council as to what exactly we're going to hear that would have an impact on our ultimate decision. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to call the question on the motion to refer back to staff. I'll just indicate that I'm not going to support this. I think for the same reasons that Mayor Krog just mentioned. I think staff have already given us their best advice. The consultant has given us his best advice, and we can appreciate input from other parties, and that has been taken into account. At some point, we have to make a decision, and I'm prepared to support what's in front of us. So I don't personally see great value in sending it back to staff who have already given us their best advice. So I will call the question on the referral after I hear from Councillor Geselbrecht and then Councillor Armstrong.
I just, speaking to the motion, I like the direction that Councillor Armstrong's going in, and I think that's what we need to make a decision on. I do think we need a bit more time on just figuring out what type of direction that we're giving here, and a bit more discussion would be useful. Thank you. So I won't be in favor, but I'm in favor of the intention.
Thank you. And Councillor Armstrong.
I was just going to say that it's the exact same thing as what number 2 is. It's the same motion, it's just to refer, which is to refer back to the council, or back to staff, so.
I certainly read it as virtually the same as option number 2.
Thank you.
All right, Council, I'll call the question on the referral motion. All in favor, please. And I am seeing Councillor Armstrong, Martman, Hemmons, and Councillor Turley. And those opposed to the referral? Councillor Geselbrecht, Thorpe, Mayor Krog, Councillor Brown, Councillor Bonner. So that tells me, with my elementary school math, that motion is defeated, and I would look for alternate direction from council. So, Councillor Bonner, is this a new request to speak or an old one?
It's a new one.
A new one? Then you're up.
Thank you. So I'm in favor of option 2 at this point, but I just think we need to have a bit more conversation in this meeting. So I'll carry on if I may. In terms of the net versus gross, I'm trying to find out examples of when this would happen, and I think they're going to be relatively rare, but there could be some serious consequences. And if I have a lot with a house on it, and I decided to subdivide it for townhouses, so I do that, and maybe I don't build them, right? I just subdivide it for townhouses. I pay the $7,500 for the 6 townhouses we're going to do. And then what happens is I decide later on to rezone it for multifamily so that I can go up. And now I've paid for the original one, and now I have to pay for it again there. So that's where I see this being a problem. And I have a friend who's a planner, and I send them questions every once in a while. And I asked, can you use community amenity contributions to push for certain types of development? And they wrote back a fairly long answer, no. So I decided at that time is if we can't use it for that, then we should probably get out of the way and let the developers do what developers do and what staff do. So to me, going with the net makes more sense because you could in theory have a a particular property that you can do some work on, but for whatever reason, now we decide we want to go 7 stories higher. And it may have already been able to be 50. So by going with a gross, you're paying for something that was already paid for in the past. And so I think that's a problem. But the other thing is, if we go with square footage instead of doors, then it doesn't matter how much the net is. I mean, I think we still should go with net, but the developer knows long before he gets in front of staff exactly how much it's going to cost, because that is the rate, right? I understand we can have negotiations, but to me, it's better to make it simpler so that developer knows as they're working out their plans and not putting anything to paper, how much a particular property is going to cost me community amenity contribution. So that's why I know we voted for door units last time, but as I've gone down this road and understand this much more, I think the gross floor area for townhouses and multifamily makes more sense, and going with the net instead of gross on rezoning applications. Those are the 2 things. I could go on, but and I do have another question, right? And this is to staff. And it's later down in the process when we talk about how we collect community amenity contributions, and they're done at the time of 4th reading or right about then. And to me, that raises the issue of how do people who are looking to retire and still own a significant amount of property able to develop or rezone their property? And I know in my particular area, there's a nice, cute little farm that has sheep on it that's just around the corner from where I am. And not to say particularly this is what they want to do, but they can't afford to rezone that property multifamily and then come up with an idea because the amount of community amenity contributions they would have to pay. So I'm thinking, is there a possibility for folks who are in those positions to not have to pay until the property is sold? Okay, another planner has talked to me, but I'll listen to that one over there.
Mr. Lindsay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll jump in and then pass off here. But I think I heard Councillor Brown mention the answer to the question is typically, and you'll remember when a rezoning application comes forward, you're often shown a conceptual plan. This is a concept of what could be built on the property. For that reason, we do not often take community contributions at that point because that project can evolve through development permit stage, through building permit stage. You might end up with a different building that's a different size or a different composition of uses. So we would often put in the covenant registered prior to final adoption that says at building permit stage, you will pay these rates for whatever you build. So that way, it's not actually the property owner that's paying, it's whoever builds the property in the future. I would say though, when it comes to a property owner deciding whether they want to proceed with rezoning, I think the community contribution is one small cost of the overall cost that's required to put an application for rezoning together. By the time you do studies and plans, traffic studies, for example, geotechnical studies, those could often or easily outpace the cost of a community contribution on all but a very, very large project. So I don't believe it's a deterrent in people making applications, but certainly the way we have it set up, where it's only upon building permit, I think doesn't put any onus on existing property owners.
And to me, that is in itself a problem, is because individuals who own land and say, and are just, they've been there for the last 40 years and their grandfathers lived there or whatever, they can't afford to develop the property because they may be land rich, but cash poor, right? So then it comes down to the developers scooping these things up and developing, and I get that. It's just that it's unfortunate that they can't benefit from the long term there. I just thought there might be a way to get around that, but that's fine.
Councillor Geselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. I definitely would like to give staff clear direction so that when next time this comes back, we can make a decision on it. The things that we are looking for, and maybe somebody can craft, I don't know if a motion is needed for it, but it basically looking at options to do the calculation on net versus gross. And then to switch where the multifamily calculation is done from unit to floor surface area. Gross floor area. And my question, just into direct potential motion, is that I'm really only seeing the issue being where the multifamily dwelling exists. That like when I look at sort of the community entry contribution rate discussion, there's sort of these different categories, and from the feedback that we've heard from the development community, I'm only seeing it really. The issue is sort of with the multifamily dwelling part. Are we able to target our changes just to that area? And maybe that's something like it'd be helpful just to ask that question to Mr. Moss, like maybe.
Through the chair, maybe there's a couple of questions in there, and I'll try. I'll try maybe. And the first is on the cost per square meter. So looking at rather than a door charge, regardless of unit type, going to a per square meter charge. Staff supported that. That was included in our original recommendation to you back in the spring, is actually to move away from $1,000 per door, regardless of unit size, and move to more of per square meter of gross floor area of building. So we fully support that. And in fact, on the chart that that's been presented to here today, if you look in the orange, although the consultant was putting forward a per unit charge, staff have translated to that to what we think would be an appropriate per square meter charge using that very same rationale. If the clarity that's required, and if the question is about, then again, the net versus gross, we could certainly, if it was referred back to staff, we could bring back some more detailed examples outlining why that can be a challenge for us to go down that route. Or, as Mr. Holm mentioned, places where it's obvious what the existing use is and what the change will make. And the one that I would think of that's very simple is from time to time you'll get a rezoning application to add an additional use on the property, a new commercial use, for example. In those situations, we don't often look for a community contribution because adding a shoe store where you used to only allow for restaurants doesn't really increase necessarily the value of the land. So in those rezoning applications, we wouldn't automatically say, okay, any development going forward, you're going to do gross. There's some reasonableness applied in that scenario, and I think that's what Mr. Holm was trying to say today, is we, policy aside, still try to apply some reasonableness when we come back at the council and make recommendations.
So, Council, if I may, my impression of our discussion, which has been very interesting, is that we've and I'll use the word strayed from simply what the rates might be and what staff is recommending to a broader discussion of how those rates are determined. And that seems to have taken up a lot of our discussion time, which is fine. I think we need to give staff direction on this. Option one was to simply affirm the staff recommendation. I might be mistaken, but I'm not sensing an appetite for that around the table. I want to ask, if I may, to Ms. Gurry, if option two would be basically the same motion as council just defeated, which was a referral back to staff. We seem to have, we've painted ourselves into a bit of a corner here, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. So the referral back to staff that was defeated for more information and to get further consultation with all of the relevant stakeholders, that was defeated. This option does say to deny the policy that's in front of you today and to provide alternative direction to staff. So if someone, one of you was to move option two, I would think that staff would like some clear direction as to what they should come back with. So, so even though it doesn't state what that direction is, that is up to you all to provide that. So you would be denying the policy that is in front of you today and asking staff to come back after you've given them direction as to what you would like to see.
Thank you, and I note Mr. Lindsay has been busy making notes all during our discussion, so perhaps he feels he has some direction, or perhaps he has no idea at all. But, he wishes
Mr.
to
Chairman,
speak.
at the risk of just further complicating it, I just want to be clear. So the recommendation in the report today is based on the direction that council gave us back in March, and it says to go ahead with the consultant's report, because that's what we were previously directed by GPC. Staff's recommendation, backing up to the start, is as it was in March. Our recommendation is column 2, whatever you want to call it here, that the proposed rates, we feel that those were the ones that we worked through with the with the NIMO development group, that we had many of the discussions that are occurring today at that table, determined that there was a balance between what could the market bear and what we think is appropriate when you factor in all of the other issues, and when you factor in that we're trying to create a policy that's simple, relatively simple to use and implement. So staff's recommendation continues to be as per March. That's not outlined in your package today. If council went through with the recommended motion of adopting the policy, it would be the policy that you sent us out with, which is the last 3 columns of new rates in January with incremental increases the next 2 years. I just wanted to be clear about that before council voted.
Thanks, Mr. Lindsay. So council, I would appreciate if somebody can give thought to a motion related to either option 1 or option 2. I have Councillor Bonner and Councillor Brown on my speakers list.
Thank you. I think we owe Mr. Lindsay a beer, sorry. Probably could have got this all done in March. But I didn't know it as what I know now. And so I'd be willing to go with option 2, and the further direction would be to look at the options under column 2. And in addition to that, I would also like to, the options in column 2 and the green in 3, 4, and 5. That is green, isn't it?
I see no green.
What color is that? Orange. Is it orange? Okay, so the orange that goes in 3, 4, 5, sorry. In addition to that, I would also like, the last recommendation by the NDG is, recommends recommends expanding the affordable housing consideration section to encourage private developers to push the boundaries of affordable housing, as well as project partnering with BC Housing. So I'd just like to see some sort of other options there so that they're not tied to those specific 4 items. I just think they're too restrictive. Thank you. Is that good enough for a motion?
I'm looking at Ms. Gurry for advice on answering that question.
So if Councillor Bonner is moving that motion, as I understand it, before there's a seconder, he's moving option 2 that's in the staff report, and the alternative direction is basically what what staff has recommended back in March, that council go with the column 2 and the green. And as long as Mr. Lindsay understands exactly what you're saying, we can word that motion to make sense that you're going with option 2 with that direction. And I just want Mr. Lindsay to confirm he knows what you're talking about.
Your worship, sorry, through the chair, can I just clarify, when you say the items that are in orange, are you suggesting that we have an incremental increase every year from 22, 23, or are you just saying that we replace, so in the column right now, for example, it says $30 per square meter for gross for townhouse. Mm-hmm. The first column in January says the exact same thing, but then there's an incremental increase that's going up substantially each year after that. So is that what we're trying to capture, is that built-in incremental increase, I guess is my question.
I'm assuming that you are going to engage the consultant again, specific now that we're talking about net and gross, and I would assume that there would be an increase each year during that time. It doesn't necessarily have to be those ones that are in the tiny letters of various colors.
Okay, thank you.
And just
sorry, go ahead, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. And just to assuage council's maybe confusion on this, Mr. Lindsay will be coming back with this policy for approval once he's gone back with this direction that he's been provided, should this motion get a seconder and be moved forward.
Thank you. So if we're reasonably clear on the motion, I would ask if there's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Martman. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Bonner, Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair Thorpe. I again will not be supporting this back to staff. I think we're in orbit around and not actually addressing sort of the fundamental question, here, and that is essentially, what is our intention towards CACs? Because I think it's kind of a fruitless process to send staff back to engage the consultant to recalculate the same numbers. You're just using a different denominator and coming up with the same values, but you're calling it net floor area rather than gross. And to me, that doesn't get to the heart of the problem, which we're talking about here is, are we actually wanting to do a more robust calculation on the lift of the land and do so by the net gain? Because, you know, these aren't hidden taxes. It's a profit sharing on the increase of value received through rezoning. That's it. So in more sophisticated markets, they use a more robust calculation based on the real estate analysis done at the time that accounts for the existing market conditions. If we want to go down that route, I think a calculation on net floor area makes a lot of sense, and maybe there's a hybrid model. But right now, I just think we're sort of flailing here without a complete understanding of what our intention is as a council towards CACs. Staff and the Navajo Development Group are trying to do their best to respond to that and provide their own different perspectives. But I don't think we're going to do anybody any favors with the current approach of just whether it's gross or whether it's net, because I don't think we're capturing the true intention of what we're trying to do. So it's an evolving process. I get that. It's a complicated process. And I'm not convinced. I don't feel personally comfortable making a decision today either way. And I'm wondering if we actually need to park this conversation, not send it back to staff, come back with some sober thoughts where we're not feeling pressurized to make the decision, have a conversation around, you know, do we want a more robust analysis, or are we happy with just that broad, simplified approach? And then if so, go from there and have that conversation around what we refer back to staff, and then from there, you know, I think there's a natural conversation based on that decision of whether we use a gross calculation or a net calculation and those sort of things. So as it stands now, I will basically be voting no to everything because I don't feel like we're doing anybody a service with the discussion presently and where we're going with this current conversation and decision making.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, and I will jump in to say that I agree at least partially with what you say, but I'll point out, of course, that we do have a motion on the floor. So Councillor Geselbrecht and then Councillor Armstrong to the motion.
I would be happy to park the conversation for a bit. I think that the decision is clear. I would love, you know, somebody to craft, and if we don't have the ability to craft up a motion that would provide this direction, then maybe we do need a bit more time. But I'm happy with the incremental increase. That's why I voted to go with it in the past. I am hearing issue by feedback from the development community that there, especially with the multifamily, that there are problems with calculating it per unit, and then also just the discussion of net versus gross. And I think that we should look into it if that is an issue, and have some initial information at the very least on whether it is worthwhile. Like, can Nanaimo, from what it's sounding like before, we're just not a sophisticated enough market to necessitate that type of analysis. But maybe we are now, and I'd be curious what the cost would be and what the benefits would be. So if we need to wait to have a better direction for staff to go ahead to provide us with some information on what that would look like if we were going to do that type of analysis, I'm fine. Or to give direction today to staff to come back with a report on that. I've seen Ms. Gurry's hand.
Thank you. I have Councillor Armstrong, and then I'm going to be inclined to call the question.
Thank you. I won't be supporting because, to be quite frank, and I apologize, I thought I did understand it, but after all this conversation, I'm even more confused. So for me, I need to learn more. So I'm not going to support anything. I was going to abstain if it went to vote because I just don't understand it enough right now. Like I said, coming in here, I thought I did, but I obviously need to sit down and spend some more time with somebody in planning so that I get a better grasp. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Ms. Rowett wishing to enter the fray.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. If it's helpful, just to give an example, we had a rezoning application where the applicant recently wanted to change the zoning to give more flexibility in the building envelope for taller buildings, multi-story buildings. And so they went from an R6 zone to an R8 zone. And so through that process, because our policy allows us to negotiate an amenity every time, we leaned into that. And we did base the amenity on a net increase. But to get to that point, it took some time where the applicant had to demonstrate the servicing capabilities, the roads and infrastructure supports for the additional density, and work with staff ultimately to determine what that translated in terms of numbers of units. So yes, just to picture what that looks like, it's possible to do that for each and every rezoning application. And it ultimately comes down to demonstrating that feasibility and crunching numbers. It does take some additional time. I think the per unit rate that has been used, not only here, but as our consultant advised, it is a common practice in other jurisdictions as well. There is some ease of practice with that. So council does have the option to direct staff to go with either option. Whichever metric is chosen, as was stated, we do lean into a covenant where we secure a rate, no matter whether it's a per unit or a per square meter rate. But I think it's just helpful to understand that it does take a level of analysis that is both more of staff review, but also on the applicant's part when we go on a per square meter net area. I'll end it there. Thank you. And if you have questions.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. And just based on some of the discussion from council and the confusion, you could refer discussion of this item to a future GPC. So the next GPC, you could pick up the discussion. If you have more questions, you need more time to think about it and think up clear direction to staff. So there was a couple of councillors that suggested tabling. You could refer discussion of this matter to the next GPC, should you just not feel comfortable moving forward right now.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry, because that is the sense I'm picking up around the table. Mr. Rudolph?
Just to throw some more confusion into it, but try to get some clarity, Mr. Chair. I think there's almost two issues on the table here. Maybe, I know the net gross is infused in both of this, but if you went back to the original staff recommendation, which is option 2, period, without the extra stuff on there, is that if you did that as an interim measure, based on the consensus that I understand the development community and staff had achieved in getting to a place and benefiting from all the work that has taken place and getting it implemented without delay, then you could separate this into 2 motions. One is to deal with it that way, and then deal with the second part of this as a separate issue where there is more due diligence needed on this to work on some of these issues and come back in a more wholesome way with these types of things. So that is just another way of breaking this issue into 2 issues. I'm not sure council's convinced that that would work, but to me it makes sense that you could take advantage of the work that's gone into this to date, update it to the extent that you can, and then still get some more information provided through either the consultant, the development community, and staff to continue this dialogue. But I think that's going to continue to take a fair amount of time to do. I'm not sure going to another GPC without further clarity around this. What clarity do we need to provide on this that would give you the comfort to make an informed decision? So I don't know, I was just thinking maybe we could split this into 2 motions. One to deal with the staff / development community consensus recommendation, which was March 8th, and then say, look, this isn't finished. We need to unpack this a lot more. Or say, look, we're not at all comfortable with this. We need to just park this and then come back at a later date. Either way is not incorrect. It's just how you want to approach it. So I was just offering a slightly different version of what I think was clear in option 2, and after that, it's less clear in my mind what you were looking for, because I'm not sure any of us really know what that means, because there's a lot of variables to it. So I probably made this worse by saying that, but there is that option attached to this, kind of splitting it into 2.
Thanks, Mr. Rudolph, and I think you're right. There's several important components to this, and we're in flux about a number of them, and it might have been easier, or it might be easier to try and split them. But again, I point out that we do have a motion on the floor which we need to deal with, unless there is some alternate direction to derail that motion. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. I just need some clarification because of Mr. Rudolph bringing up option 2. I was confused. The motion on the floor that has been moved and seconded, could Councillor Bonner confirm that that's option 2 in the report and not option 2 on that screen there? I'm just for my clarity.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. It's kind of like a little of both. I just wanted to say that, to me, this is a GPC. I am totally enjoying this. We're understanding things. We're going to get to this eventually, and it'll be really good when we're done. It's just brutal getting there. So my idea here was column 2, in terms of and looking at net and density, and then having an increase in the per square footage. But I'm quite willing to go down the road of Mr. Rudolph or Ms. Gurry here in terms of bringing this back, fleshing this out a bit more. So that's the motion on the floor, is column 2 on this screen, and with increased yearly.
Thank you.
And the little bit about expanding affordable housing.
All right, so that is the motion which is on the floor. Councillor Geselbrock.
This is just getting more and more confusing. We passed, just for clarity, we passed last council to go ahead with basically what's on the screen and having that incremental increase for the next. That's what we currently have in motion, correct? Okay.
Through the chair to Councillor Geselbrecht. So at the last GPC meeting, staff recommended column 2. Council took the information from the consultant, which is basically the last 3 columns, and said proceed with that work. Proceed with the recommendations, the direct recommendations of the consultant. So we went back out, did further engagement on that, and we're back today to get council's direction. So the option 1 in the report, the recommendation is to go ahead with the recommendation from the last GPC, which is those last 3 columns there.
Right. So Dawn's option 2 is not the option 2 that's on our staff report. I think it's just, I'm going to vote not in favor of this motion just because it's gotten confused, and I would be supportive of a motion to defer this discussion to a following GPC, and where, council can come, those who want to take initiative with a bit preparation on exactly what we're looking for. And for me, I feel like I'm becoming clear of what I'm looking for. I would like to proceed with the incremental increases in all those categories, but I would like to see an investigation on switching our approach to a net calculation as opposed to a gross, and then also to change the calculation from per unit to square footage. And so I'd be happy to give that direction today, but if it's just getting too confusing, then we can defer it later on and more discussion can be had, and we can come to the table with some more clarity and direction. Thank you.
Thank you. So Council, I see Councillor Bonner wishes to speak again, and I will allow him to, but then I'm going to call the question on the motion on the floor. I'll indicate that I will not be supporting it. I think we need to move on from this, and I would subsequently be prepared to either support the original option 1 in the staff report or a motion that refers this back to a future GPC for further discussion, elaboration, and information. So those are my thoughts. Councillor Bonner, and then I'm calling the question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite willing to see this motion go down in flames, but I could also withdraw it. I've seen worse motions I put on the floor get knocked down, so I'm getting used to it. So I want to see this thing move forward. My concept here was what Councillor Gisselbach just mentioned. That's what I was going with. The only reason I just wanted incremental, I just wanted it to go up each year, but it was based on square footage and net as opposed to things. So those are the things that I'm interested in. And number 4 here regarding affordable housing, I'm willing to withdraw the motion and we can craft up something else just to make things a little bit easier.
So the mover of the motion is willing to withdraw it. Ms. Gurry is...
So the motion belongs to the table now, the council as a whole. It's been discussed and debated. A vote on it is in order right now, not a withdrawal.
Works for me. So I will call the question on Councillor Bonner's motion, and I hope we all understand it. All in favor? Not even Councillor Bonner. And for the record, those opposed. And I see all hands raised, and that could be a record, Councillor Bonner. So that motion is defeated. Now, we need further direction to staff. I indicated 2 possible courses of action that I would support, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be the upcoming motion. Councillor Brown.
Okay. A risky move, but I'm going to propose a motion.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
A risky move, but I'm going to propose a motion.
All right.
That staff work with PDG and other appropriate stakeholders to provide options for council's consideration of calculations for townhouse residential dwellings on a per area calculation and an amenity contribution values based on net floor areas.
Thank you. I'm just making sure that Ms. Gurry got that wording.
And
Not entirely, Chair, but Councillor Brown will send it to me and repeat it, I'm sure, if you all need it to be repeated.
If Councillor Brown wouldn't mind doing that, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So I think what I'm hearing from the council table is the problem is right now we're comparing all separately something before us with something that we don't have. And we're all doing that slightly differently. And so then we find some commonality, but we're also talking past each other. So what I'm proposing here is that we just simply ask staff to get us with working with the appropriate stakeholders to get back just a little bit more information so we can compare what we have before us with 2 things. What I'm hearing from council is, and some of the feedback is calculations for townhouse residential dwellings based on a per area calculation rather than a per unit. I think hopefully I got that correct. And that there's some interest in what would amenity contribution values based on net floor area. And so I'm hearing from Mr. Lindsay that might be slightly more complex. But I think it would be great if we had that in a staff report for us to sort of digest, compare and contrast to what we have before us. I am aware that this would be more work for staff on this issue that's taken some time, and I apologize for that, but I think we might be in a better place to make a decision on this at the next, if we had that in front of us. So to read the motion again, and I of course will send it to Ms. Gurry, that staff work with PDG and other appropriate PDDN, too many acronyms. That staff work with NDG and other appropriate stakeholders to provide options for council's consideration of calculations for townhouse residential dwellings on a per area calculation and amenity contribution values based on net floor areas.
Ms. Gurry, you're okay? Thank you. And I heard Councillor Martman seconding that motion. I'm afraid to ask, is there any discussion? Councillor Geselbrat?
Yes.
Yes.
Just further to that, you know, staff and PDG did sit down and have discussion, and we did get that recommendation to just keep it with column 2. And I think what I would like different in that discussion going forward is that staff in the discussion with PDG make it clear that council would like to see the incremental increases that were laid out to reach what the consultant said that would be appropriate for the market as a basis for fine-tuning with the net calculations and the per floor area, so that aspect is now part of the discussion, negotiation. Would that be what Councillor Brown is intending?
I would not want to answer on his behalf, but I believe it is, and I'm seeing a nod.
Yes.
Sorry.
Great. So I'm supportive of the motion.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support the motion, but I do so with the caveat that staff understand that it's not a new calculation based on net, but that it's a conversation between net and gross. So we have more information rather than a whole new conversation to have when it comes back to us. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Then I will call the question on this motion. All those in favor? And are there any opposed? I am seeing none opposed, so we have given staff finally some type of direction, and we look forward to a future conversation where we delve into this subject at more length. But it is an important one, so thank you everybody for your contributions. Ms. Gurry, you know what I'm going to say.
Are you thinking that recess is in order, Chair?
That was one of the things I was thinking, yes. I was also thinking this reminds me of all the fun I used to have at RDN.
So yes, Chair, there is a scheduled recess for 3 o'clock. It is that time now, so I would suggest you have a 10-minute recess and we come back and carry on with the agenda.
Let's say 3:15 we'll resume, Council. Thank you.
Hi, Leonard Krogh here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krogh.
Done.
Next, you're going to hit search. And you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's V-O-Y-E-N-T. Now you see, it's already selected it. Click there, hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in, it just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select Open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right. So
you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow. And the reason that is, if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Down here, okay? There we go.
Oh, hey, Tiana.
Hey.
It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, buddy!
Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh. Go, 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 go! Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, dad in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
What we have here is the Real Ice technology that was installed at the Nanaimo Ice Center. It allows us to use cold water from traditionally hot water that we used to use for making ice. Basically, the water will come in through the bottom, go in through a vortex idea, making the air bubbles microscopic in size, which makes a better, more dense sheet of ice.
Differences that you'll see with the Real Ice is there's less snow developed, so that's easier for cleaning, and also it's a denser, harder, clear ice. So the ice skaters will certainly enjoy that. And the city plans to implement Real Ice at our other 2 arenas as well. Some of the other efficiencies we've implemented in this facility are LED lights in some areas, and we've also, in the last few years, installed a higher efficiency refrigeration system, which lowers our energy costs. Both Zambonis at our facility are now electrically operated, so there's no harmful emissions, and they're very quiet as well. So what this means for the city is that we're able to use less energy and also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more beneficial to the environment.
We're here at Bruce and Dundas. Somebody's stolen the street names that were here, so we're here to replace them. Our sign shop has just generated us 2 signs, so I'm going to go through the process of putting it together and reinstalling the street names. First thing, we got to center the signs. We do everything on this truck. We've got all the equipment on here to build, install, remove, repair, whether it's street signs, street names, posts, banners, Christmas decorations, and so forth. I'm going to basically just put the sign in the brackets, and we'll be doing both signs, of course. So I've got a cross bracket that I'm going to put in. And then add the top sign, which is this street we're on, Dundas. Sorry, do the same there. We put the street that we're coming up to on the bottom, so they all basically have the same. The cross street will be on the top. We got to put some bolts in to secure them so nobody will steal the street name. We're ready to go. Just put this back and we'll go out and install this where the missing one is. Every year we do what we call a stop sign survey, where we go around and check all the stops. We clean them, make sure they're in the right spots, in good condition, not bent, and we also clean the street names, make sure they're good as we're doing that. If there's ones that we decide we want to replace, we do that at that time. This year we're looking at approximately about 120 sets. It's very expensive to do, but we're continually, weekly changing street names because of either them getting damaged or people breaking them and taking them. So I'll put this on, and then I put a bolt through to secure it to the post. There we go. And that's good, we're done. Dundas and Bruce Ave are now ready to go.
12. And back up in our agenda to item 6A1 under Governance and Management Excellence, Policy and Bylaw Renewal Project Update. And Ms. Gurry, you're going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm very excited to introduce this item to the Governance and Priorities Committee, and I'll introduce Ms. Robertson, who's going to come up and give you an update on the Council Policy and Bylaw Renewal and Update Project. She's been working away on this for quite some time, and she's shifted a bit into policy and council policies while still working on the bylaw registry, and she'll give you an update on all of that. But I'm very happy with the progress that she has made, and she's going to recommend a number of outdated council policies to be repealed. So over to Ms. Robertson, and thank you.
Thank you. And just before Ms. Robertson starts, I was going to wait and say this later, but I'll say it now. Thank you for your work on this. What a huge task. And you note 100 outdated or redundant council policies that you have highlighted for us. So, Council, my plan is to take them one at a time. Councillor Bonner is quickly agreeing. I thought he would. No, seriously, any discussion is of course, appropriate. But, Council, on the other hand, I am going to point out that our meeting ends at 5 o'clock, and our meeting will end at 5 o'clock. And the last item on our agenda is a Reimagine Nanaimo presentation, which our staff has gone to some trouble to prepare for, and I really don't want to shortchange them. So any cooperation that you can give in keeping questions to the point and moving things along would be appreciated so that we can get through this entire agenda. So, having said that, Ms. Robertson, welcome. Please go ahead and tell us about our outdated policies.
Thank you. This has been actually a really fun project to go through and very interesting. So I'm happy to share the results with you. It is worth noting that it is one of Council's action items within your strategic plan to have a renewal of Council's policies and bylaws. And so back in October 19th, 2020, I presented a timeline and deliverables for undertaking both projects. And a copy of that report is attached to the agenda. Now, the primary focus today is going to be on the policies, but I did also want to provide a brief update on the bylaw project as well. So I'll cover that one first. So in my October report, 5 goals were identified for the bylaw project for 2021, and they included developing an animal responsibility bylaw, development of a master bylaw registry, streamlining the bylaws associated with the city's ticketing system, developing a comprehensive fees and charges bylaw, and scanning of all signed bylaws for business continuity purposes in the event of a flood or fire. So in terms of the animal responsibility bylaw, the original target was to have that bylaw adopted December 21st. However, Council wanted to provide some further opportunity for engagement, and staff were then to provide a further report in January based on the feedback. That report was presented, the bylaw was given its 3 readings and forwarded to the ministry. The ministry wanted a few amendments, and Council endorsed those on June 7th, and so the bylaw is once again back with the ministry, and I'm hoping that it won't be too much longer before I can bring that back for Council's consideration of adoption. So development of a master bylaw registry was the priority project identified back in my report in October, with a target for completion at the end of 2021. However, because the work took on, there was quite a bit of work associated with the animal bylaw that took a little longer than anticipated. And then there was a desire in November to actually shift the focus to the policy project so that we could actually get that accomplished in 2021. Since the drafting of this report, staff has also now resumed the work on that master bylaw registry. Oops, did I switch this? Yeah. Streamlining of the city's ticketing system is an ongoing project, and to date we've had 5 regulatory bylaws that have had violation and penalty language updates, along with the corresponding amendments to the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw. And so as those bylaws continue to come forward, we'll take those opportunities to make sure that that language is updated, and therefore we can have some consistency with all our bylaws. Currently, the city has a fees and charges bylaw already, but it has very few fees identified. And we also have a separate development fees bylaw. The rest of the fees are actually outlined in each of the individual regulatory bylaws, and in some cases through this project I found out are actually located in council policies as well. So this can understandably make it challenging to find those fees. And so the goal is to eventually have them all in one comprehensive bylaw. So again, like the ticketing bylaws, as we bring them forward, an analysis is done in anything that has fees, and then we would bring forward, pull out, and put them into that fees and charges bylaw. So it continues to build and become all-encompassing. In terms of the bylaw scanning project, I am really pleased to advise that we now have scanned copies of all of our signed bylaws, and the project was complete ahead of schedule. And that really sort of concludes my brief update on the bylaw project, unless council has any questions regarding bylaws before I move on to the policy update.
Councillor Bonner, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. My just a simple question is, you were talking about the fees and charges being in a bylaw. I was under the impression that generally you put that in a schedule so that it's easier to update.
In the actual fees and charges bylaw, like a Schedule A and a B and a C, or?
Well, I understand that a bylaw takes 3 readings and it has to go to public input, that sort of thing. If we put the fees and charges in, not in a bylaw, but in a schedule or a policy, then we can update those relatively easier than changing a bylaw.
Well, most of the fees are already in bylaws. It's just that they're all over the place. And so what ends up happening is, and I'll give you an example. I'm recently working on a fire amendment bylaw, and there are fees for a burning permit in there. And guess what? There are also fees for a burning permit in the fees and charges bylaw, and they have conflicting prices. So that kind of stuff can happen if it's in a variety of places. It really is good governance to have all your fees in one spot. So it's an easy document that staff, members of the public, council can all refer to. And you may want to go through a point at some point in the future that says we're just looking at a 2% increase across the board on fees or something. It's very easy to do that when it's in one comprehensive bylaw.
Yeah, but my question, if it's in a bylaw, it's a little bit harder to change than if it's just in a policy.
That's correct, because it takes 2 meetings to change a bylaw versus 1 meeting for a policy. Yes, you're correct on that.
So, but it's your recommendation that we would have the fees and charges in a bylaw?
That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Robertson.
Okay. So in October 2020, when the deliverables were presented to council, the intent for the for 2021 is in terms of the policy project itself was just really to develop a framework for a master policy registry. Then when I came forward with the update on the bylaws, I would come forward with more deliverables and timelines on the policies. But as noted previously, there was the shift so that it could be completed in 2021. Now, the details of the work are outlined in the staff report, but I think it's worthwhile spending a bit of time outlining what has transpired since then. And so the first step in the project was to establish council and administrative templates. I'd seen a few different iterations that had evolved over time, and it gets complex when you can't see a policy and the headings are in the same spot and the bodies are in the same spot. Some have statements, some use other language. So that was the very first step. What do we want our policy templates to look like? From there, then we developed the Master Policy Registry, both for council and administrative policies. And it was developed very similar to the one, I don't know if you'll recall when I presented in October, it looks very similar to that one, so that you can actually track your policies and their amendments. And it's also a really good tool to use for those policies that become historic. It really is your starting point, because as you'll see from some of the policies that are being presented today, a number of them conflict with other policies because there's no one-stop shop to know where all those are and for staff to look at to go, well, hey, we already have something on this. So once the registry was developed, staff conducted an inventory of all the existing policies, like where are all the city policies? Some were on the website, some were housed in miscellaneous folders in various places, and some were actually only available in hard copy. There were some you couldn't even open, the Word versions were so old. And so there was this old big fat council policy binder, so thank goodness for paper in that case. Most of the policies were actually in hard copy, so because we needed to get them in an electronic format anyways, we decided to make the decision to just put all the policies, whether they were going to be historical or not, into one template, so it would be really easy for the senior leadership team and for council to view them. Once that was done, now the audit process started. And that meant going back to the minutes to confirm when the policy was endorsed by council, and in some cases reviewing the staff reports to get some additional information. And the reason why we needed to do this is when the audit got underway, it was discovered that often the policy statements or directives were never presented to council in a policy template. They simply came forward as a directive in the resolution contained in the staff report. So some were obvious through the wording of the resolution where it would say, that council by policy do something, or council support a policy to do something, but others were also a little bit more vague. And either way, it was often left up to the legislative services staff to actually put closure to it by transferring those directives into the policy template so that there was at least a record of it. There were also staff recommendations asking for council to support a policy that did not fit a council policy. It did not have the criteria to meet it at all. So for example, there was one, it was a resolution from 1993, and it recommended that by policy, council directs staff as a general practice to introduce all bylaw amendments resulting from policy decisions of council as soon as possible. Well, this is operational direction to staff. It's not really a council policy. It doesn't fit the council policy criteria. Another example was to appoint a bylaw enforcement officer. In this instance, it's only a resolution that's required, appointing an officer. It is not something that is a council policy. Others duplicated bylaw provisions. So there was an example from 2007 where there was a delegations policy. And when I looked, it actually mirrored identically the council procedure bylaw. So there's no need to have add confusion by putting that into a council policy. And I think probably the most interesting example of something I saw in a council policy template related to the Leisure Economic Access Program, where the policy stated simply to contact the Parks, Recreation and Culture Department for more information. So it's like, yeah, no. So through the audit process, there was approximately 70 of these that were discovered and removed as they just were simply directives. Staff then needed to confirm for the purpose of the registry when the policies that were marked historic in the binder got repealed, as the information was it wasn't noted on the policy, and I couldn't find in my work where did these things actually get formally repealed by council. I was able to confirm about 28 of them, but there were many others that were marked historic in that council policy binder, and I just could not find anything. So fortunately, we have our old friends that used to work, and I touched base with the previous staff member who was in legislative services in 2016, who was working on that project, and she confirmed that it was the intention to bring the policies marked as historic to council, but that it didn't occur due to staff turnover. Now you have new staff come on board, and understandably they're looking at the binder and it says historic. They're going to assume that they're historic. So this is partly why there are so many policies before you today, is that we're looking at that formal process to get them off the books. On February 9th, I then introduced the Master Policy Registry and reformatted policies to the senior leadership team and advised on next steps. And then during mid-February to mid-March, I then met with each city department to apprise staff of the project and to convey that the next step was for staff in their respective departments to review the policies that were in their areas and identify whether the policies were okay as is, whether they needed amending, and if so, why, or if they needed to be repealed and why. And staff were given till May 14th to get back with their feedback. And then meanwhile, while waiting for that, I started work on the administrative policies and putting those together and organizing them. And this work will also continue. So once the responses on the council policies were received, they were tallied and placed into the table of contents, which you guys have in your council agenda packages, so that it's easier for presentation, both when I presented it to the senior leadership team and to council. And the results yielded 39 as being still applicable, 45 that needed to be amended, and 100 that needed to be repealed because they either conflicted with other policies or bylaws, they were no longer legal, they reflect outdated practices or processes, or they were no longer relevant due to the age of the policy. So the 100 policies outlined in red in the table of contents are now before Council for consideration of formal repeal or for the committee to recommend to Council. And the rationale for repealing them is identified in the right of each policy, and should Council support repealing all 100 that are before you, staff would look for a motion on to support option 1. Or should Council wish to retain any of the policies, staff would look for Council to support option 2, whereby Council could identify specific policies that they wish to retain, but repeal the remainder. And so now I'm going to just, is there a way to click on that link? So prior to making any motions, I'm just going to open it up so that we have members of the senior leadership team today that are able to respond to any questions that Council might have on any of the policies before them.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. I did quickly skim through them. There were some really interesting ones and some really very outdated ones. Any questions of Ms. Robertson on specific items in this list, Council? Councillor Bonner.
I was going to give someone else the opportunity. You were actually pretty close when you said we were going to go through them one at a time, because that's exactly what I did. I have some questions. I'm fine with repealing them all, just so that are front, but I do have some questions on some of them. And a lot of times the question refers to, this seems to be a policy, but it hasn't really been followed. So who made the decision not to follow it? And so the first one is on DCCs for not-for-profit rental housing. And this policy refers to paying 50% of reduction of DCCs out of the general DCC fund. However, I seem to remember that when we do this, they come out of the Housing Legacy Fund. I was wondering why the difference there.
And I don't think I have the scrolling ability up with this one, so can you pull that one up? Sorry, scroll back a little bit. The DC, Councillor Bonner, which one?
It's the DCC for not-for-profit rental housing.
Oh, that's the one. Okay, so if you just click on the actual red, doop, there you go. And that's the policy. Okay. Go back down to it.
Mr. Chairman, was the hope I would jump in and answer the question?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I think as you've heard today, a lot of these policies came in some cases, many years ago. And sometimes what happens is legislation ends up changing or our bylaws end up changing, and then it was never repealed when it should have been repealed. And this is a classic example of that. So this policy was developed at a time before our bylaws actually allowed for a reduction in DCCs for affordable housing, and it occurred at a time before you had your Housing Legacy Reserve Fund. Didn't exist. So the policy was established that if you came forward and Council was supportive of a DCC reduction, that it would be paid for out of the fund that was available at the time. Today, the bylaws actually allow automatically. There's no council decision making in that. It already allows for a 50% reduction. You're correct. In a case where council wanted to pay the other 50%, then we would normally recommend today that it come out of the Housing Legacy Reserve. But I don't believe that there's a policy need for that, so the recommendation is that this simply be repealed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to skip over. I sent all the questions to you earlier, but I recognize we're short on time here. So the guideline for application of frontage works and service requirement. I would like to hear staff reason behind the comment, too much discretion and prediction to be applied means. Because I read over the policy, and it seems to me pretty clear that it's a fairly straightforward policy in that, from my understanding, is that if there is no plans in the future to put sidewalks on a street, then the sidewalk frontage isn't collected. And that's what I kind of read it to be. So I was just wondering how does that one work?
I guess it's back to me, through the chair again. So this is, again, this is a policy that we've had for a number of years, and we've also, I would note, I think the earlier version of this said it repeal this one, and this is one, upon further reflection in the questions, I think it is not to be repealed, but to actually be amended. So this has been moved over to it needs further work to be amended. Part of the background around staff's comments is that the guidelines were anticipated at the time that if there was no development anticipated on the neighboring properties, that we may not get this project in the middle. And there's always this classic example of the sidewalk in the middle of nowhere that doesn't connect to anything, which the city is often criticized for. So staff were expected to look at and say, okay, what is the likelihood that the neighboring properties will develop? And if they're not going to develop, then you would apply a policy generally that said, okay, we're not going to then build this infrastructure in this place. What the statement was trying to say is it becomes very difficult for staff, especially in the last few years as land development has changed in the community to a point where now lot consolidation and redevelopment is possible and financially viable when it wasn't probably when this policy was drafted. So it becomes much more of a staff needing a crystal ball to say, okay, what's the financial market's going to look like 10 years from now to debate whether it's realistic that works and services might be done. So it's really putting the onus on them. And then of course, if they make the wrong call and they don't get the works and services and the neighboring properties do end up going, then there's a question of, well, why didn't we get it here? So really, I think the rework on this policy is more about if there's a technical reason why works and services can't be built, then we would likely look at alternative requirements. However, if there's just it's not a technical reason, but just a economic reason, the applicant always has the ability to come forward to council for a development variance permit. And I think council's seen a couple of those over the years. So yes, the policy is still needed, but it definitely needs some refinement.
Okay, thank you. The next one is sometimes in your report you say this should be in the OCP or this might best be in the OCP. It was managing blocks of vacant land, and I said, are these actually in the OCP? Like when you have that, this should be in the OCP. Does it actually get there?
Which policy is it?
Managing blocks of vacant land. I think your comments are this should be in the OCP.
Okay.
And through the chair, I think there's a few policies like that where there were really land use policies that were adopted by council. And the general statement was that if you're going to have a policy like this, it should exist in the official community plan adopted by bylaw rather than having these general council policies. So that was just a general comment. It comes up there, and I think there was another one about developing on waterfront lands where there's kind of the same comment that if there's going to be a policy, it should be in the official community plan. In the case of this policy itself, it was actually done at a time well before many of these properties, well, certainly well before the last two official community plans, which saw new land use designations, new land use policies developed for these properties. So I would say the new plans have not necessarily, you won't find the exact same policies, but a different set of policies that apply now to these properties. So that would suggest that this should be repealed.
Okay. The next one's one of my favorites. It's bicycle traffic lanes, which we have lots of conversation.
That's an engineering.
31 years ago, this policy was passed, and it basically said that any new updates or work done on roads would result in a bike lane being installed, sort of to that effect. And I was wondering what happened in the 31 years, because I don't see, I'm guessing pretty well every road has been repaved in the last 30 years, but I don't see bike lanes on every single one. And I understand, this is one of these other questions, okay, this was the policy, it sort of wasn't done, like who made the decision not to have done it, sort of thing.
So, Mr. Chair, this particular policy, as well as a few of the other ones that Councillor Bonner's highlighted, have been policies from the 70s or the 80s. So this particular one was overtaken in the 1990s by a new policy that said all shared cycle lanes will be 4.3 meters wide. And that's been subsequently overtaken by our new engineering standards. So the 4.3 meter lane was thought to be sufficient at the time, but it currently isn't.
I see. So the second one stopped the other one from being implemented, I guess, because you couldn't make 4.3.
It superseded it. It
Yeah,
superseded the first one.
Okay, thank you. There's the sidewalk asphalt walking shoulder policy, and what is replacing this policy, or is that in the Moses document?
This particular one has been replaced, Mr. Chair, by the engineering standards and has been for a number of years. This was, again, an old and outdated one.
One more, if I may be indulged. Council remuneration and CPI. To me, if we'd been doing this from day one, we wouldn't be having the conversations we have on a regular basis when we do talk about council remuneration and everybody hates us, because it would already be there. So I'm just wondering why this one hasn't been acted on. Oh, here we go.
Chair, I can probably help to answer that. So it is actually applied. So come the start of every year, the finance department does adjust your income according to that policy. And the one vote that you did have not long after you were in office was on the, and I'm not the finance person, but it was on the change in your taxable benefits and income. So you did make that voting decision on your income and wages, but every year, in accordance with the policy, your wages are adjusted in accordance with that. So you haven't had a vote on that. There was going to be the Council Remuneration Task Force, which was looking at different ways of doing that and a broader discussion on your income and wages. But as of COVID and the new council direction was that is no longer on the table and going forward.
All right. The rest are fine. I will move.
I see Councillor Armstrong has a question first.
Yeah, I just wanted to put out too, and that mine goes to the school zone signing guidelines. It's under the policy 4 and 5. Those are actually contrary to the Motor Vehicle Act. So I don't think they should be there.
Which ones, sorry?
4 and 5.
4 and 5 under which?
Under the school zone signing.
Okay, to make it easier for me, whereabouts on the table of contents?
I don't know, I just got it up here. Sorry. I just want to make you aware that it's contrary to the Motor Vehicle Act, so that needs to be changed.
Ms. Robertson, it's under the engineering section, and it is near the end, and it's school zone signing guidelines.
School zone signing guidelines, okay.
Yeah, so 4 and 5 are contrary to the Motor Vehicle Act. We have been told by Judicial Justice of the Peace to remove those school zone signs because they are illegal, yet we remain them, yet they're still up because school zone signs have to be on a road where the school actually exists.
So I would just note, Chair, through you to Councillor Armstrong, the school zone signing guidelines, and it's sections 4 and 5. So the notes on that one is needs amending. It is still relevant, so that is definitely something that we will look at when we're amending that.
Thank you, because like I said, the Justice of the Peace did ask the city to remove them, and I know that hasn't been done. And then I had one other one. Hang on, I got to go to my notes on this side. Like Councillor Bonner, I read them all as well. Oh, just on the RDN policy too, just the fact that the government changed it now that we have to have 8 sitting, not the 7 as in the policy. So that's just another thing I saw hasn't changed.
I noted that one too,
Yeah,
Ms.
okay,
Robertson.
thank you.
So it's the change from the 7 appointments
Up to
to the
8. I
just looked
directors to
by
now
policy.
it's 8. So yes, it needs to be amended, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you very much for all this work. It's awesome.
You're welcome. Is that it?
Yes, I don't see any other questions, Ms. Robertson, so I'd certainly entertain a motion on the recommendation.
Yes, that would be excellent. And if you could also go back to the PowerPoint for me.
So, Ms. Gurry, would we like a
Yes, please.
recommendation moved now?
I think Councillor Bonner was moving it before Councillor Armstrong's question, so yeah, if he would like to move it, and it could be put on the floor.
Councillor Bonner is moving the recommendation. Mayor Krog is seconding. Any discussion? I'll call the question then. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, that carries unanimously.
Awesome. And just in terms of next steps, oh, I had the screen, the one up there. I'll go back here. Staff, this will now go to council for the formal motion to be made there. Once that happens, staff will update the policy section on the city's website so that all the policies are current. And then we will turn our minds to updating the ones that have been identified. And the goal is to have these done by the end of 2021, barring some big business case potential, because some of them might take quite a bit of work. And then, of course, as new policies, as they come forward, they'll be reviewed to ensure that they are, in fact, a council policy and not just a directive, and ensure that they come forward in a council policy template so it's fairly obvious to everyone what it is. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson, again for all your work on this. Much appreciated. So, council, we're going to move to item 6.3. I believe, and that is proposed amendments to the business license bylaw. And Mr. Lindsay, it's back to you to introduce this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned...
Oh, sorry. Yes, we did. That I counted everybody's hand up, but I'll call the question again.
Oh, I had it noted as unanimous.
I had it noted as unanimous. So we will move on. Well, you got to stay alert here. Proposed amendments to the business license bylaw. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you mentioned, we're here this afternoon just to give you a brief update on proposed amendments to the business licensing bylaw. And I'm going to turn it over here in a moment to Ms. Davidson, who's the manager of our licensing department. I just want to be clear this afternoon with council. This is really an opportunity for us to introduce some proposed amendments. This was not a wholesale review of the licensing scheme the city does. I think it would be best described as looking at our bylaw, making sure that that it remains relevant, that it's consistent with the current legislation and best practices around the province. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Davidson just to walk you quickly through a few slides to talk about the proposed changes that will ultimately come forward to council.
Thank you. Ms. Davidson, welcome.
There's actually 34 slides, but I'll go really fast because I know you're... sorry. There's 34 slides, so I'll go... So, not to take up so much of your time. A business bylaw establishes the requirement to obtain a license, in addition to fees, terms, approvals, rejections, violations, and regulations. The current bylaw was adopted in 1998. At that time, fees were tiered. It was later changed to a flat fee model because of its simplicity and ease of use. No further changes to fees have been made since then, except to add food truck fees. Business bylaws from these 5 similar-sized communities were reviewed. Most municipalities use a tiered fee model. Of the 5 communities, only Saanich utilizes a flat fee model. The flat fee model is by far the least complicated and more business-friendly. This is an excerpt from Kamloops bylaw. As you can see, it has potential of being confusing and administratively challenging. It appears that a primary fee is calculated based on business's primary function, and then fees increase based on a secondary service provided. Kelowna also uses this model, having a primary and secondary fee structure. Prince George appears to only have primary fees. However, fees differ depending on the size of the business. Similarly, Victoria's fees also differ depending on size and capacity. These are only samples of the fees. The actual fee schedules are extensive. In comparison, Nanaimo's fee structure is easy for customers to understand and easy for staff to administer. Changes to fees are not being proposed at this time. In keeping with current practices, it is recommended that the fee schedule be removed from the business license bylaw and inserted into the fees and charges bylaw. Similarly, changes to the fine schedule are not being proposed at this time. And in keeping with current practice, it is recommended that the fine schedule be inserted into the fines bylaw, or I'm sorry, the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw. Here is our current fine schedule, and this concludes the background information. The slides following provide information on what's proposed. There's a lot of detail in the slides, so I'll do my best to summarize. Proposed amendments affect only some of the definitions, sections, and regulations. Fees and fines, as mentioned, have not changed. Maps have only been updated in terms of appearance. The following definitions have either been updated or added to reflect current business models and or to provide additional clarity to existing definitions. Escort service has been updated to differentiate a social escort from someone accompanying the elderly or disabled to an appointment or activity. A definition for nonprofits has been added in conjunction with the updated section that will follow. The following definitions have been removed, and there is no specific reference in the proposed bylaw, or it has been covered in another definition. This is just a continuation. The following slides describe additions to the bylaw sections. Nonprofits have been added as a result of expressed interest to do so. I've listed a couple of benefits, including nonprofits, in the licensing process, and that is to provide additional data for staff to use, and it provides an opportunity to ensure that the premises occupied by nonprofits are compliant with land use, building, and fire code requirements. Currently, this is not being completed. Adding the requirement for commercial property owners to obtain a license ensures a consistent approach to licensing commercial properties and the administrative process. The majority of this information is obtained from the business license application. However, the requirement to provide supplemental information has been added. As an example, businesses that are subject to government enactments include security services, private investigators, and cannabis-related businesses. Making it a requirement of application ensures that other licenses and/or approvals have been obtained and that the business is legally permitted to operate. Currently, fees are prorated for the first year of business only. This section is intended to provide further clarity. This very long sentence is lawyer language to convey that a business license needs to be renewed annually. In following up with outstanding accounts, business owners often say that an invoice was not received. Adding this section to the bylaw ensures that the renewal is required regardless. And if it is not renewed, staff have the authority to close the account. sorry. A prorated fee is not applicable to a previously closed account. If it is established that the business was operating despite not having a license, any outstanding fees will need to be paid prior to reissuing the license. In order to streamline the proposed bylaw, regulations have been removed from the body of the bylaw and inserted as a separate schedule. The following regulations have been added to capture current business trends. And the following have been removed. The regulation for raves has been removed. However, if an application is received, it could be processed as a special event with specific conditions. The fetal alcohol spectrum disorder regulation has also been removed. If council chooses to regulate businesses with regard to signage related to FASD, a new bylaw could be prepared. Typically, municipalities that regulate signage for FASD do so through a separate bylaw and not within the business license bylaw. Should council wish to proceed with a separate bylaw, the public health officer needs to be consulted and the bylaw deposited with the Ministry of Health. In summary, the proposed changes are primarily limited to formatting and updating to provide more clarity. Again, changes to fees and fines are not being proposed at this time. These next few slides illustrate business license stats. This is the trial balance, which would go into general revenue. And just for your knowledge, an intercommunity license is an add-on license, so mobile businesses can operate in other communities participating in the program without having to obtain additional licenses. Intercommunity licenses are regulated through the Intercommunity Business License Bylaw, and the license fee is $170. This slide illustrates new business licenses issued in 2019. Other business licenses capture commercial, special events, and food trucks. In 2020, the other license category dropped during COVID. However, home-based businesses increased. These are the stats up to June the 29th, and if the trend continues, the number of licenses and revenue will surpass the 2019 stats. This is my final slide, and it shows the total number of open business license accounts to the end of June. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Ms. Davidson, thank you very much. You had me worried when you said 34 slides, but you moved through them very briskly and we could hear you clearly, so appreciate that very much. Thank you for your work on this. I do have a couple of councillors with questions. Councillor Armstrong, did you have one first?
Actually, I want to make a motion on liquor primary down, change it to food primary, but I can do that after the discussions.
All right, thank you. If you'd hold off on that, I'll go to Councillor Turley.
Chair, through you, Ms. Davidson. With regard to commercial landlords, section under definitions, I'm just unclear how we refer to a business that has the same corporate entity for the property they operate in, as well as the business that operates within that property. Would they need two business licenses then, or just the one?
For example, we had a business license application for, I think it was a pediatrics office. So they owned a building with 2 units. They had a commercial rental unit that was leased to a naturopath. So they had the commercial rental, and their the naturopath had a license. So 2 licenses.
But I'm referring to whether it's just one building, one occupant, and the occupant is the same structure as the business, ownership structure as the business.
1 unit, 1 building?
Yep.
Be just 1 license.
1 license, okay. And the other question I have, if I may, Chair, is with regard to, again, under commercial landlord, where they state that as a condition of continuing to hold a business license in respect to carrying on business, the commercial landlord, no business license holder or operator shall permit a commercial tenant or renter to carry on business in the same business premises without the tenant or renter holding a valid business license. My question on that one is, I'm questioning whether or not the landlord has the legal right to actually seek that information, and I'm wondering if that is being vetted through a lawyer to confirm my ignorance on that.
Yes, it has.
Thank you.
This was more to capture, like malls, for instance. There's a lot of tenant turnover, and lots of times we miss out on licensing because they've already left.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Through you, your chair, I'm wondering, it was showing in the report that there's many municipalities that are using a 2-tiered system. Now, we're keeping it simple by a flat fee, but I don't, when I look at equitability, I'm looking at, for instance, childcare. So mom and pop shop that has only 7 childcare pays the same licensing fee as a commercial childcare center with 30 or 40, 50 children. So I'm wondering, I know it's not on the agenda for today, but is this something we will be reviewing, perhaps at a Finance and Audit Committee or something, where we do look at the fees we're charging? Because I think we're pretty low.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. You're questioning the $50 childcare fee?
Are we looking at reviewing a 2-tiered system? For instance, in some of the other municipalities, there was 1 business license fee for smaller childcare of maybe up to 7 children, and then a different fee for those that are commercial childcare that looks up to 50 children. Or for instance, those in the finance, or I'll take BCAA, for example. There was different for those in the finance sector, the amount of employees they have. So they pay a different, whether it's up to 10 employees or whether you have 40 or 50 employees. So personally, I think it makes sense for a city to do tiered fees. So I'm wondering if that will be brought back to us at another time for us to review the fees.
I'm not aware of that, but I follow direction.
Mr. Chairman, I think what I would add to that is certainly not in our plans at this time. I would say, and if you go back, and I think probably Ms. Davidson, maybe she mentioned this already, is that, you know, at one point we did that. We had a whole variety of fees for all different types of businesses across the city, and a review was done, and it was found it's much easier to apply, just have one standard rate that applies across the board. So yes, I understand the rationale of, well, I'm a small business, why am I paying as much as the large one? If we move to a tiered system, probably wouldn't see the reduction in the rate for the small business. It would see an increase for the larger business. Small businesses still paying the same. So, and then when we looked at, more just for information, the comparison of municipalities, you know, comparable sized communities and those in our area, you know, there's a variety of approaches, but our general fees are right in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. Some of those, I would say, are even at staff level. When we tried to read the bylaws and understand them, we found them extremely difficult to even compare apples to apples because of just the nature of their bylaws. So at this point, we're not planning on any changes to generally what is a one-tiered, with a few exceptions, a one-tiered system, but certainly open to direction from that, from council.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things, if I may. I looked up Saanage's, and they must have changed recently because they offer a tiered system now, where they have small commercial and large commercial, and small intermodal commercial and large intermodal commercial. It's a minor thing. It's a few extra dollars, but now it looks like we're the only municipality that's doing it at the flat fee. Don't particularly have a problem with that. I just thought we could in the future look at more of a tiered system. My question is, and I think we talked about this a couple of years ago anyway, casino escort service and massage parlors, what did they do wrong to be 19 times the amount that a regular commercial place is?
I found an old report that outlined the reasons why they were so much more expensive than the general 165 fee. And that was because of the, I guess, the police presence that was required.
I see Councillor Armstrong's nodding over there in XRCMP, so I've done this a few times of yielding to her knowledge. But in this case, I'm not sure it quite works out that way because we actually don't have a definition of massage parlor in our bylaw that I could find. And so I looked up massage parlors, and I can't find any massage parlor definition in any bylaw in any municipality in this province. Some of them refer to massage, but they lump it in with acupuncture and a whole bunch of other things, and they lump into one thing. But and a few talk about escort services, but none of them. Couldn't find any mention, especially the casino. I just don't know why they're paying so much more. To me, it looks like we don't want you here. That's why the fees are so high. That's sort of what it looks like from the outside. And I think we should bring those down to at least what most of the other municipalities are charging for this type of thing. Not that I'm going to be using them other than going to the casino every once in a while, but if we're going to go down that road, I would think that the places that do the paycheck loans and those sort of things, which are basically paying 165. If it's a question of vice, to me, that would be where we should be going, right? But we're not, and I'm fine with that. So the other thing was in terms of adult stores, and most of them refer to them as adult stores now in the other municipalities. Victoria and I think Burnaby are they're at 18 years of age, and I was thinking that maybe we should just list ours as the age majority in BC. Therefore, when that changes, our bylaw would change, as opposed to having it as set rate. So that would just be a suggestion of looking at sometime in the future.
I'm sorry, you mean to update the regulation?
Yeah, whenever we do get back to that, is changing that wording so that instead of it's not as 19, and most of the ones I could find were at 18, lower it to, set it to at least the age of majority. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Thank you. I see no other speakers on my list, so I'll go back to Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I was waiting for my motion. I do want to make a motion, though, that we do change the liquor primary business license fee of $1,100 down to $165, the same as the food primary. And if it's seconded, I will speak to why I believe that's the way to route.
So moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by, is it Mayor Krog? Thank you. So,
the reason I say that is when this bylaw was in effect, restaurants and food primary could not sell alcohol without food being purchased. Now that law has changed, so you can go into a place, I'm not going to name places, but you can go into places and just have beers or drinks or whatever. So I think it's very unfair now towards the pubs and the nightclubs to have that license like that. So that's the rationale behind my motion, that I think they're being treated unfairly versus what food primary are.
Any other speakers on this motion? I'm seeing none, so it's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And I see none opposed, so that passes unanimously. Council, can we make a motion regarding the staff recommendation then, if there's no other questions or other comment? Moved Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll I'll call the question on the recommendation. All in favor? Any opposed? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Bonner, your name's popped up again.
I just wanted to congratulate Councillor Martin and Armstrong for being able to get motions through this tough crowd.
I just hope they're aware that we voted. They might have missed it. All right, thank you very much, and thank you again, Ms. Davidson. So, Council, we come now to our topic of community wellness and livability and an infrastructure grant regarding active transportation. And Ms. Legan has joined us. Ms. Legan, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you is to seek your approval to proceed with the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant. We're proposing 2 projects, each of which we will be applying for the maximum, which is 50% of the funding, $500,000 each. These applications are due on July 30th, so it is a rather short turnaround, although we were apprised of the opportunity just recently as well, so moving as quickly as we can. We do have Mr. Rose here to answer any specific project-related questions, and Ms. Fulla is on Zoom to answer any detailed financial questions. The 2 projects that we are proposing are Number 1, the Metro Complete Street Corridor Phase 2, which is in our active transportation plan, is already funded, which we have to advise that we have. Our funding is this is a stackable funding opportunity. And then secondly, the 4th and Albert Complete Street Phase 4, which is also in our active transportation plan.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor Brown with a question.
I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
Sorry, Your Worship. Sorry, Councillor Brown?
I didn't mean to do that.
Oh,
so,
okay,
yeah,
no problem. Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much. We don't seem to have had much luck with our applications lately, except on very smaller projects, and I'm just wondering, are you satisfied? And I assume you are, and you're going to tell me that, but I just want to hear it. Are you satisfied that these projects are possibly more likely to succeed than other applications?
I see Mr. Sims hustling down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No reason for a hustle other than just wanted to be here in a timely manner. Your Worship makes a good point. There's been a number of applications that have gone forward this year, but the active transportation ones have been successful in past years, and we expect that at least one of these 2 should be successful. We understand the province is committing a great deal more funding to active transportation this year than they have in the past, which is also the reason for the doubling up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I just had a question on 4th and Albert Complete Street phase. Is that gone to tender already?
Through Your Worship, no, that has not gone to tender yet. That's we're just finalizing some details with the design.
Will that come into play, Phil?
Sir, Councillor Armstrong, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know why, but your microphone, I don't believe, is on.
That's why
There
I
we
forgot to take it off. Thank you. I guess my question is that something that should be done before the application, or is that not normal?
Through Your Worship, no, we typically don't tender before applying for a grant.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Martman, you were there, and now you're gone.
It was answered sort of, and just for clarification, this may sound really silly, but in the motion, it says 4th and Albert, but you actually mean 4th Street and then Albert Street, right? Because I was trying to figure out in my head, where does Albert and 4th cross? And then they don't.
No, through Your Worship, the 4th Albert Street is actually known in our transportation master plan as the VIU bike route. but with so many unique corridors in Nanaimo, the same street is different names as you go along, and so it is 4th and then becomes Albert.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Council. If there is no other questions, I would look for a mover of the recommendation, Councillor Brown, and Mayor Krog I saw seconding. Any other discussion on this? Call the question then. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Ms. Legan, and good luck.
Thank you.
And Council, we come to item E, which is Reimagine Nanaimo. And Ms. Bhopal Singh, I believe, will be introduced. Perhaps she needs no introduction, but she's been very patient, and we're pleased to see her in front of the committee again. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. It's working. Great. So before I begin, I actually wanted to acknowledge that as I've said to you, I get to present to you, but there's a team of people behind me, and there's some in the audience today I'd like to acknowledge, introduce to you. So you know Chris Schulberg, of course, and he was instrumental during our Phase 1 process. Karen Cronsdell, who's been leading us during Phase 2, along with Christy McDonald, and you'll also see 2 new faces, Kash Abigan, who started with us as a planning assistant, who's responsible for the banners, t-shirts, and a lot of the graphics that we're getting through Reimagine, as well as some technical work. And also we have Mallory Lowe's, who has been doing TikToks with us, who's one of 2 VIU students, along with Julie Bull. And then also thanks to Jana from Lanark, who you've met, Zielinski, because this is a tremendous team effort. So I thought I'd start off with that. And as you know, we came to you on the 28th with a soft launch of Phase 2, where we put online a survey. So I'm going to quickly go through these agenda items, including what we're launching tomorrow. Very quick, fun surprise, and you'll have some choices about what you wish to see, as this is an interactive process with you as the steering committee for Reimagine. So project overview, you know we're in Phase 2. I've mentioned that our online engagement and our overall engagement with the community is going till September 20th, and of course it can be extended depending on how Council evaluate our status updates. We launched on June 28th the foundations, which was giving people an opportunity to give feedback on the Nanaimo donut, the draft goals related to that, and the draft indicators. And I'm pleased to say that we already have over 125 online surveys completed, so people are quick off the mark to start giving us feedback. So that's kind of what the foundations form looks like online. We also are providing hard copies for people who wish to do their surveys that way, and we did have several that were dropped off or picked up during Phase 1. So that's the paper version. And then I'm going to skip through this slide here and talk about the scenarios launch. So this is what we're launching tomorrow. And as you can imagine, this is the real meat of Reimagine. This is where we're asking the community to provide feedback in a range of ways and comment on our different pathways forward and the different options. And one of the keys to this, and I'm saying this, I think you know this through your guidance through us, but also to the community, is that while there are 3 paths that we're putting towards people, is that there's an opportunity for people to comment on the different elements. And those can be merged into one scenario. So it's not like they have to pick one or the other. They have the opportunity to comment on different aspects of each of the paths and let us know. And we'll use that, plus feedback from our government stakeholders and internal departments, to knit together a final scenario for you and the community to give feedback on during Phase 3. Now at this point, I would like to offer you and show you one of the scenario videos. We actually have 3 of them, and they're about 3 minutes each. And what we're finding from our feedback is that people really appreciate videos over reading reams of text. So we'd like to show you something that our consultant's done. And so with that, I'm going to be quiet and let you listen. And you can let me know if you'd like to see the other 2.
Scenario 1 is called Current Path because it looks at how our community could grow if we continued on the path set by our existing official community plan. Here are some highlights. In this scenario, 4 existing town centers, Woodgrove, Hospital Area, Vancouver Island University Area, and Downtown, are focal points for growth. In addition, a 5th town center, South Nanaimo, is considered for undeveloped lands south of Chase River Commercial Center. These 5 town centers would be focus areas for residential and commercial growth in the coming years, with the goal of creating vibrant, walkable destinations. Corridors would connect between the town centers and would continue to support a range of uses, including low and mid-rise residential homes and mixed uses to provide services for people living in these areas. In addition, existing commercial centers would support a range of commercial and residential opportunities. Recent development trends that have led to growth and change along corridors would likely continue. Neighborhood areas throughout the rest of the city would continue to be lower density areas characterized by a mix of ground-oriented building forms like single-family homes, secondary suites, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, and mobile homes, along with neighborhood-scale local services. This scenario includes potential for a resort center in Ocean View, located in South Nanaimo. This would be a site for a comprehensively planned resort community that includes a full mix of land uses, including residential, commercial, open space, and public and recreational uses. Existing industrial lands would be maintained in Nanaimo, and opportunities to increase utilization of these lands could be explored to help support forecasted industrial demands. However, a forecasted shortage in industrial lands means that some new industry could locate to other communities. Scenario 1, Current Path, would maintain the growth patterns observed in Nanaimo over the past 5 years, continuing to realize many of the goals set through the existing official community plan. In the past 5 years, recent growth has responded to our community's goals and has shown progress towards creating a more sustainable Nanaimo. Current Path would continue these trends. Recent growth in town centers and quarters have encouraged living opportunities closer to employment centers. When people have the choice to live closer to where they work or shop, it can help reduce the need to drive. Over the past decade, the city has secured more parkland throughout Nanaimo, meaning many people are fortunate to live within 5 minutes of a park, and new development will continue this path of adding parks close to where we live. While our current path was progressive when created in 2008, new knowledge provides opportunity to build upon it and make enhancements that could move us even faster towards our goals. With some larger areas of undeveloped lands remaining in Nanaimo's boundary, Current Path will likely lead to many of these lands being developed in the coming years. This might mean a bit less infill happening in our existing town centers like Downtown or Woodgrove. And as undeveloped areas are built out, new roads and services will be extended into these areas. New roads and services, like our existing ones, will need to be maintained and operated by the city and funded through municipal taxes.
So Council, that's one of the videos that's going to be available online tomorrow. You can watch the other 2. You have options to watch them at your leisure. So just being mindful and respectful of your time, what would you like?
Well, Ms. Bhopal Singh, I'm going to jump right in on this. You've been very patient today, and we wanted to give you time to have your full presentation. I'd be happy to see the other videos, and unless I see any dissent from council, I think we'd all be very interested. Thank you.
Perfect. So if I could get 2 and 3, please.
Scenario 2 is called Mobility Hubs because it explores what could happen if we chose to focus much of our future growth around existing hubs where existing transportation networks come together and create strong connections between them. A focus would be on creating complete town centers at each hub with new living opportunities nearby so that more people can have their daily needs met closer to home. Here are some highlights. In this scenario, 7 distributed town centers, Woodgrove, Nanaimo North, Country Club, Hospital Area, Vancouver Island University Area, Downtown, and Chase River, would become focal points along main transportation routes, providing pockets of higher density housing and more services throughout Nanaimo. These 7 town centers would be a focus for services, recreation, culture, active transportation, and new housing. In order to focus commercial activity in the walkable town centers, This scenario contemplates a bit less corridor designation than the others, where we would see a mix of medium-density residential and mixed uses. Infill neighborhoods are an important consideration for this scenario, with the goal of increasing ground-oriented types of housing like townhomes or fourplexes that can help fill a gap that often exists for families looking for something between single-family homes and apartments. These types of housings would be encouraged along all major transportation corridors, on the edges of town centers, and anywhere services can be efficiently reached by transit or active transportation. Neighborhoods beyond these areas would remain similar to today. In some neighborhood areas further from town centers, local hubs could be encouraged to form around existing school sites through partnerships and collaborations, seeking to combine educational activities with day-to-day neighborhood needs like gathering spaces, daycare, wellness, cafes, or other neighborhood-scale amenities. This scenario prioritizes finding more industrial opportunities in the city to continue building employment options. It looks at shifting some areas that have heavy commercial uses like car dealerships or storage into light industrial, and increasing the amount of industrial lands in South Nanaimo along Highway 19 and at Ocean View. Scenario 2, mobility hubs, would lead to more growth in compact town centers that are distributed along major transportation routes throughout the city. Over time, as town centers become more complete and growth is distributed between them, more residents will have nearby access to daily needs, helping to reduce vehicle trips and supporting reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. By encouraging growth both in town centers and nearby infill neighborhoods, there will be opportunities to increase ground-oriented housing types which are limited in Nanaimo today, adding a wider range of housing options. As town centers and supporting areas grow, they'll evolve into walk, bike, and transit-supportive neighborhoods with enough residents to support viable businesses and to warrant increased transit frequency and stronger connections. With a more dispersed approach, growth will happen through the decisions of landowners and the market. This means that new development may not happen first in locations where it's most desired. For example, other town centers could see faster development and change than downtown. With more gentle density like townhomes, development will be more spread out than if there was more of a focus on higher densities like apartments. When growth is more spread out, it can mean more roads and utilities that need to be maintained, which affects taxes. A more distributed approach among 7 town centers will stretch resources, requiring prioritized decisions about where the city should invest first in services, recreation, active transportation improvements, and other amenities. Scenario 3 is called Central Focus because it considers what it would mean to focus much of our future growth within the central part of Nanaimo and create a vibrant heart in our city. Here are some highlights. In this scenario, 3 main town centers, downtown, Vancouver Island University area, and hospital area would form an urban core that would be the focus for many new jobs and homes. With a growing number of people living and working in this core area, it would become a focal point for investing in active transportation and transit, recreation and culture, and community services. Existing destinations, including Woodgrove in the north and Chase River in the south, would continue to be smaller town centers, supporting services and residential growth, though to a smaller degree than the core area. Corridors would connect the town centers along key transportation routes and would support primarily residential uses like apartments and townhomes, with some mixed uses to provide local services. This scenario contemplates the idea of regional employment lands in South Nanaimo along Highway 19 with a mix of industrial, commercial, and service functions. These areas would provide jobs and services for both Nanaimo residents and people from around the region. Neighborhood areas within the core would encourage more infill with a greater mix of townhomes, triplexes, fourplexes, and secondary suites becoming available. Neighborhoods beyond the core would remain similar to today. New industrial lands would be added in South Nanaimo to capitalize on strong access to the transportation network, including highways, port, and airport. Scenario 3, Central Focus, would lead to more substantial growth in the core area and more people living and working in this area in Nanaimo's future. With more growth within existing built-up areas, undeveloped lands and outer areas can be preserved for other uses including parks, natural area protection, recreation, agriculture, or other uses. By having more new residents live in existing town centers, there's an opportunity to build critical mass that supports thriving businesses and a vibrant, walkable center. And this scenario would have the strongest financial resilience because it requires up to 25% fewer new roads and utilities than options that spread growth out. This means that the city would have fewer roads and utilities to maintain in the long term, helping to keep taxes lower. More people living and working in a central area means we'll need to shift our transportation habits faster and provide strong alternatives to driving in order to manage congestion in this central core. With many of Nanaimo's existing recreation facilities outside this core today, people may need to travel further to access them. And with the focus on strengthening the central core, while improvements will still happen in other parts of the city, it could be a bit slower than in other options.
So, Council.
Ms. Bhopal Singh, I'll just comment that very interesting pros and cons for each scenario. I'm sure that will generate a lot of interest and good feedback and discussion. Thank you for sharing those.
Thank you, and that's our hope. And this is one of many different ways of people giving feedback. So I'm going to go through with you the different platforms or methods we're using during phase 2, which are a little bit different than phase 1. So we have, if I could go to the next slide here, we have options to do workshops. And actually, before that, I should mention we also have online feedback forms, whereas people can do their own self-guided workshops as well. But with the workshops, what we're doing is we're allowing for people to provide anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes investment in time up to 2 hours, depending on the level of interest they have and how much they want to delve in. And so debate around some of those pros and cons can happen during that time with a staff person there to listen and guide. So we already, since June 28th, have 78 people willing to invest a significant amount of time in workshops. So we're quite pleased about that. And one of the things we'd like to offer Council is you, of course, guided and vetted us in what the materials that we put out for phase 2. And would you like to have your own workshop where we would run you through the same information we would the community members who are signing up? And that would give you an opportunity to debate and have that conversation yourself. So something to think about and something that you might want to consider. We are also providing a self-guided booklet. So again, those can be done hard copy or online. And again, this will be launched tomorrow. And the videos will really help people who don't have the time or don't fit in with the schedule of workshops and want to do it at their own pace. And then third, this is MetroQuest, which is a software that Lanark have facilitated us using. And so I'd like to throw up the link here because this is a really innovative platform that other municipalities around the world have used. And I want to show you how it works and how interactive it is, because it's another way of people playing. It's the closest we could get to our version of SimCity. So what this does is it allows you to choose your priorities, and based on those priorities, what the feedback is. So I'm going to get Sam, because it turns out I don't actually have a keyboard here, so I have to go through Sam to play. So you can see that based on our feedback in phase 1, we've got various items that people can prioritize, and they can put it in order of preference. And then what happens is when you pick those priorities and you go to the next slide, so he's picking 5 there, and you'll notice we've got social services at the top. You can then see how your priorities measure up in terms of the different scenarios. So it's a really interesting interactive tool that allows a community member or one of our stakeholder groups to play with those different pieces and then see whether that will get us closer or further away.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, I just took you off the list. Councillor Armstrong. Sorry.
Thank you. I just have a question. So you've pre-selected the priorities. Is there a way for people to put in? Because I know, like for us, well, at least for me, I get so many emails on community safety, yet I didn't see community safety anywhere as a priority. Unless I'm missing it.
Okay. Let's see. I may turn to one of my team here to ask whether, Right now, with the way MetroQuest works, we weren't able to have it so people could put their own priorities. So these were based on what we took from phase 1. And I'm just wondering, yeah.
So Chair, just if Ms. Bhopal Singh could repeat that, or staff could come to the front to the microphone so those that are watching from home get that information.
So what Ms. Began just let us know is that while you can add in the comment section, the little bubble at the bottom, things that you also consider important, the way the software works is we can't interactively put a new category in and then have an indicator, because that has to be pre-done by the consultant. So if you look at the evaluation criteria on the next page, and the other thing with community safety is in terms of land use, this is very much land use based, and some things like community safety would be policy based, and so wouldn't necessarily show up in a scenario where we're picking between industrial or commercial and those factors. So people can give comments when we start giving them the draft policies and comment there. So,
thank you.
Sorry, through the chair, Councillor Armstrong, does that make it a little clearer? Thank you. And then people have the opportunity to rate the scenario up above with the stars. So Sam, I don't know if you can show them where that section is. Oh, if you go back to the orange one, your priorities, and the next slide, where if you go to the next slide, the arrow's at the very top. Yeah, sorry, thank you. And then there, and there you can do that. And then if you click on the scenario 2, it's a similar process. So if you stay on the pink one, Sam, and scenario 2, and you'll see the same priorities there. So it allows people to see whether it will take us further away or towards what we're hoping to achieve, like towards or worse than today. And so that's that particular set of the 3 scenarios. And then the other piece in MetroQuest that I'm quite excited about is the scenario building, which is the green tab. And Sam, maybe if you could zoom into downtown a little bit further, kind of where we are. And what this allows community members to do is to pick from the tabs up top and put where they would support different amenities. So if we pick, for example, tall buildings, and then if he clicks on that, you'll also see a few more details pop up there. And if you go to the Select tab, it gives you a range of options slightly down, Sam, where it says Select. Yeah. So if you go to the very top, lower down. There we go. And then, yes, there we go. And then they can, and there's different options there. And then you can also add in your comments there and be even more specific. And so it allows people to build their city and their preferences in both their neighborhoods as well as the whole city. So quite interactive. So we would encourage you to get online and play with this.
Sorry, I've done it again. Councillor Brown, you'll have to turn on your, there you go.
Thanks, Chair Thorpe. Will there be an option to place supportive housing on places that you would support?
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I couldn't hear you.
Would there be the option to place things like supportive housing?
Yes. So if we go back to the green one, and if you go to support services, and then click on that and look at the select, is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Perfect. Thanks, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just
yes.
curious, yeah.
So it does allow for a range of different options within there. And then people can also put other and describe what they would like to see. So we're quite excited about this, and we're very pleased our consultants come up with this alternative, because again, people can take the time to engage and play with their families, their friends, their children, and they can focus on their neighborhoods, they can focus on the whole city, and really show us visually their priorities. So, do you have any questions about this software before I move on?
Not seeing any others at this time, Ms. Bhopal Singh. Very interesting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And if I could get back to the PowerPoint, please, Sam. Thank you. Okay, I will get us back. And there. So, starting tomorrow on a very auspicious July 13th, we will be launching the information you see before you and giving people an opportunity to play with MetroQuest and the scenarios and also the survey online. So, and pick up any materials they may wish or have them mailed to them. So, things that we've already been doing, you've seen that we've been quite successful with engaging elementary students and their families. We had around 600 different students, 27 classes participate outside SARC. We've had another 230 art kits given out, and we'll be putting up displays. We've already put one up at Bebin, and we're looking at doing one here at the VICC with the support of the management. Libraries have static stations now, and as things are opening up, we have more opportunities to promote. And big kudos to our Parks and Recreation planner who's working with us, integrated Kirsty McDonald, Kasia, and then our co-op students for a lot of the outreach materials you're seeing. We also will continue to use the committee structure, and our next meeting actually with the Environment Committee is this week on July 14th. And here you've got a picture of the accessibility, the Advisory Committee on Accessibility and Inclusion. And knowing that we in phase 2, in terms of our statistically valid and online, had underrepresentation. Although we've done a lot of other outreach to schools, we are focusing on how to engage this part of our community. And that, as you know, we were out in the schools, and we're planning in September to have some plug-and-play lessons, either in person, Zoom, or lesson plans for high school students in September, in that first week when teachers may want and be able to need something the first few weeks to do, and they can quickly tie it into their socials, their science class, and we want to really thank the school district and their communications team and education team for supporting our work with that. The other thing we're going to do is outreach, as we've done before, with different groups, whether it's the Multicultural Society and others, and provide them with opportunities, ensuring that we are looking at ways of reducing a number of barriers to participation. The other thing we're doing is 2 representative focus groups, and this is where we will be engaging a company to select a group of people. They won't know what it's for, and they will basically be guided through a Reimagine workshop with a facilitator. We will have as staff the opportunity to observe their responses and reactions. Staff will, of course, have no input into who comes, and so it's a way of us testing out without any kind of biases. And so we're interested to see the results of that and have council also share those results with you. So we'll be doing those in September. So our next thing is a fun surprise done by our co-op students. And so if I could get the TikTok up, please. Thank you. And I have to say what a pleasure it is to work with such a great team of people who come up with very cool ways of communicating with the public.
This is Julie. Julie just moved to Nanaimo, and like most young people, she's a little concerned about what her future holds. Lucky enough, Julie came to Nanaimo just in time for Phase 2 of Reimagine Nanaimo, where she can help decide the future path for the city. What are her options? Scenario 1 is the current path, which closely resembles the growth we've seen in Nanaimo over the past 5 years, with a mix of multi- and single-family development and more growth happening in South Nanaimo. Scenario 2 is mobility hubs, with more growth happening along corridors like the Island Highway and Bowen Road, and more density and mixed uses in town centers. Scenario 3 is the central focus, with most growth happening between VIU, downtown, and the hospital area. To learn more about these scenarios and to have your say, log on to getinvolvednanaimo.ca to give your input or to sign up for a scenario workshop today. Hey Nanaimo, this is...
Okay, so the voice was Mallory, who's sitting behind me. And we now have our own TikTok channel. Who would know? Reimagine Nanaimo. And so as we get other materials, including the punkonometry video, those will be linked and posted there. So again, a way of reaching a diversity of people, whether they have a few minutes and of all ages and ranges. So next steps. So we are in the thick of phase 2, still aiming to come back to you in the fall with the results of that, when we'll start developing the plans based on the input in phase 3. And so in the yellow highlight here is where we're at today. Tomorrow is the scenario review launch. We'll ongoing engage with the committees as they're available before they break for the summer. And then we will be rapidly, staff, just so you know in the background, are rapidly reviewing wording in our existing documents, confirming what we think works, what we're hearing needs improving, so that we have draft materials to start coming back to you from the policy side of things. So right now we're focused on the land use, but there's a number of policies in our plans that we're looking at integrating with parks, recreation, culture, active transportation, and all those different things. And I have to say, I've never undertaken a project quite like this, and very few municipalities have, particularly during COVID. So I think that's kudos to you guys at the steering committee. So any feedback and thoughts, comments, or on our next steps?
Mayor Krog, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I just wanted to say thank you and keep it rolling. Looking good. Very impressed.
And I'll echo that certainly, Ms. Bhopal Singh. You said kudos to us, but it's kudos to you and your team. And this is a huge project. We really appreciate the dedication and the hard work that you're putting into this. And you know, the result will be, if I may, a lot more people becoming fans of Reimagine Nanaimo. Sorry, Council, I couldn't resist. But seriously, thank you very much, and thank you for the update today.
Okay, thank you, Council.
And on that cheery note, Council, it brings us to item 7 in our agenda, which is question period. And I believe I saw Mr. Manners heading in the direction of the question period table. Not once, but twice. Mr. Manners. So your first question is agenda item 6A2, the community contribution policy.
Yes, good evening, Council, or good afternoon, Council. My name is Bill Manners from Nanaimo. My question relating to this community contribution is, I have 2 questions. One is, the increases per year, like having it go up a certain amount this year and then more and then more. Is that designed to encourage development today rather than tomorrow?
Well, Mr. Lindsay, what would be your response?
Thank you. Through the chair, I would describe it more as the final number after 3 years was the recommendation from the consultant, but it allowed for a phased-in approach rather than moving such a large jump in 1 year. That it was basically, here's where we want to be in 3 years, and it allows for a phased, known approach so that the development community can adjust to that, rather than the suggestion that it's trying to encourage development this year. No, that's not the intent.
Okay, and my second question relating to that is the date of the application or the date that they start, the date of application or the date of approval?
The date of application.
Thank you, Mr.
And Councillor Brown, did you wish to respond? No? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Manners. Your next question was related to item 6A3, business bylaws.
Yes. My question relating to the non-profit business licenses. By bringing in non-profits and making them pay a business license fee, it is putting an unwanted expense. And I also would like specifically to know would neighborhood associations that under the proposal will be required to be nonprofit? Will they all have to purchase business license?
Sorry, I can answer the second question quickly. No, that's not the intent, where there's certainly a number of nonprofits in the community that have employees and have operations, and the intent is to track it so we have that data, but not to require licenses for neighborhood associations, no. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand the first question.
I'm not sure I heard a first question, Mr.
Okay,
Manners.
so my question is, would neighborhood associations be required to obtain a business license?
So that
as
answer,
nonprofits?
that answer is no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manners. Appreciate it. Council, Mayor Krogh is moving adjournment. Councillor Bonner is seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions and your patience this afternoon.